We're going to use Hearthbone for the full card review. So let's go over the set. So if you don't know what the deal is, the set is based around a new mechanic called Tourist, where if you have a Tourist card in your deck, you can play whatever the listed classes cards from this set aside from the other Tourist. So if you have buttons, you can play all the Shaman cards from this set except for the Tourist. That's the 10-second rundown. Buttons, I think, is interesting, mainly because, but I think it's also like not super strong. I'm actually surprised at how low power level this Tourist is compared to the others. But that doesn't mean it's a bad card. I think it is a good card. The Shaman cards do let you do a lot of interesting things. The Shaman cards do let you do a lot of interesting things. But at the same time, they aren't as like varied as you'd expect. Like, I think the nature spell is kind of a hard buy. Yeah, it's Magatha for spells basically, but yeah. You'll easily have access to fire and nature, but I believe that's it. Fire, nature, shadow, and frost. It's unfortunate they didn't give an arcane spell to Shaman, because that would have made it like perfect. But drawing 4 is still very solid. And then the other Shaman stuff synergizes pretty well with a bunch of Death Knight strategies. So there is a real world where you play buttons, just to draw 2 even. Next up, Eliza Goreblade. For the rest of the game, your minions have +1 attack. This Death Rattle is very strong, but the problem is that this body is very weak. Also, the rune restriction kind of hurts it. So this is a kind of card where it's like, it's not very splashable. You're probably playing this in Rainbow. But the thing is that I think there's a world where if you're playing a Warlock, a Death Knight package in Warlock, you'd actually rather do Double Frost 1 Unholy than Rainbow. And I'll explain why in a sec. Mainly, like, this card I don't think is that big of a payoff for Warlock. But in Death Knight, this is a pretty big payoff. They wanted to make sure if you're doing any kind of Death Rattle shenanigans, it can't be done in 2 out of 3 rune decks. Yeah, the thing is that this is like the traditional class, or the traditional rune classification for Death Rattle shenanigans is Double Unholy, 1 Frost. And Double Unholy 1, if this card would let you do Double Unholy 1 Frost, it would actually be really scary because you could like easily quadruple this Death Rattle with the right hand. Like you could give it Reborn, then Dead Air, then use the 2-mana spell to force it to attack stuff. Like, as it stands, I think you'll be able to get it like 2 or 3 times consistently. But if you had the Death Rattle access, this might have been too strong. So I can actually see why they made it Rainbow only, basically. Next up, Frostbitten Freebooter, 3-mana 2/2, Death Rattle, freeze 3 random enemies. Any that were already frozen, take 5 instead. So this card I think is actually super interesting, and I hyped this card up quite a bit because I think it has amazing synergy in Warlock. And it also has good synergy in like more pure Frost strategies, or that Double Frost 1 Unholy thing we were talking about. Double Frost 1 Unholy, I like that they're promoting these sort of not pure strategies. Hey, Emic, glad to be using your site. I think your site's best for like these big reviews. But yeah, thank you for working so hard to design such a good website. But yeah, Frostbitten Freebooter, I think this card is super interesting because what it does is it actually gives you something that can work as a win condition in Frost decks. Yeah, you can play it in Triple Frost, but again, I think the real spicy zone is Double Frost, 1 Unholy. And I think there's a couple cards in this set that really promote that kind of strategy, and I really want to see what people come up with. I also think that this card is amazing in Warlock. I was talking about it before, but there's a really cool play you can do where you can go turn 4, Fellfire Bonfire, kill a minion, reduce your next Death Rattle by 3, then turn 5, play Soul Freeze to freeze 3 enemy minions, then play the Warlock Tourist, the Death Knight Tourist, the 4-mana duplicate death rattles and kill them instantly. Then you play Frostbitten Freebooter for 0 mana. And that way, you freeze 3 things twice, and any that were already frozen, take 5 instead. And because you froze 3 things already with Soul Freeze, you probably just cleared their board and dealt 5 damage to their face. And anything that didn't get killed, well, it's frozen. So I think that this card is actually very solid and very interesting. Another card that can support that kind of strategy that I was talking about is Slippery Slope. This card on the onset does not look very good, but I would say it's better than it looks. If you think about it this way, Glacial Shard sees play. For 1 mana, you just freeze 1 thing, and you get a 2/1 body. Drawing a card is way better than a 2/1 body, and if you're able to get 2 things frozen, this card is amazing. Because remember, it will freeze something and then draw at least 1. If you're able to get 3 things frozen, this card is insane. But again, the problem is how consistent are you able to freeze things? Now, the 2 classes, weirdly enough, that can do it the best right now are Warlock and Death Knight. And I was talking about this before, but what I actually love that this card is a 2 Frost Rune card. I know that there was a lot of discourse on Twitter that 2 Frost Rune cards are actually like not worth it, or sorry, two rune cards are bad because they like muddle deck building, and I think that that's the exact opposite. 2 rune cards are exactly what you want to promote right now, because if you promote single rune cards or two single individual rune cards, so if you promote a single rune card, that'll either promote Rainbow or it'll promote Triple Rune. And the problem is that Rainbow and Triple Rune are the most boring aspects of Death Knight. The most interesting aspect of Death Knight is where you go double Frost, 1 Unholy, double Unholy, 1 Frost, stuff like that. And I'm really sad that they've been limiting how much that you can do with that. So I'm actually glad that they printed this card, and I hope we see more cards like it. Because this card both supports Triple Unholy or Triple Frost, but can also support these ideas that we were talking about, like double Frost, 1 Unholy, double Frost, 1 Blood. For me, one of my favorite decks to come out of the last, during showdowns in the Badlands was Maw and Paw Control, which was 2 Unholy, 2 Blood, 1 Unholy. And that I actually really respected as a deck. I thought it was cool that it did its own thing, but it could use many of the rainbow tools, but it also got little surprise advantages that no one saw coming, like Corpse Explosion. So again, I think these cards are actually exactly what Death Knight needs. Next up, Horizon's Edge. This is a very crazy card. 4 mana, deal 3, randomly split amongst all enemies. After a friendly minion dies, reopen this. Every Unholy deck plays this. Most token decks play this. This is a damn good card. Yeah, I don't even know what else to say. This has the most durability of any location ever. If you're able to leverage this effect 3 times in 1 turn, it's insane. Even twice in 1 turn is very solid. And twice is very easy to do. So yeah, this is a super strong card. Next up, the Snow Shredder. 4 mana, 4/4, 1 Frost, costs 1 if a character is frozen. I think that this card will encourage a Frost package in both Death Knight and Warlock. I think we could see this cool, pun intended, we're going to see like a very strong, aggressive tempo deck coming out of Warlock and Death Knight. And I think that this card will be a key player in it, because it's a sick payoff for the freeze stuff. This reminds me a lot of the Happy Ghoul, and Happy Ghoul absolutely terrorized the meta when it was in Standard as a part of that Zoo deck. And I think that we'll see something similar, but a lot more modern for this Death Knight Warlock hybrid. Next up, the Brittlebone Buccaneer, 2 mana, 1/4, Undead Pirate. Whenever you play a Death Rattle minion, give it Reborn. This card just seems good. I don't know how else to put it, but like, If you're able to tag any decent death rattle with this effect, holy shit. This gets really scary really fast. And the fact that it's on a 1/4 body means that there's a very good chance that this lives till next turn. Like, when I think that, oh, you remind me of Hanar, that means that you're a good card. But yeah, even something like Reska's the obvious insane synergy. But even something simple like the Baron, the 3-mana 2/2 Battlecry and Death Rattle draw card, that's really good with this too. And that new Frost card that we looked at is also very good with this. Because it's like, you freeze the board, then you trade in again, then you murder the board. But yeah, I really like this card. And I think it's very strong. Also, you can get it in Rogue, and then you can... Yeah, okay, enough of that. But yeah, I like this card a lot, and I think it's very cool. Oh my god, it's Ghouls Night! Ghouls Night! Summon 5 1/1 ghouls that attack random enemies. I like this card a lot. It's very funny. But I also think it's actually kind of good. Now, in a regular Unholy deck or Rainbow deck, I'm not entirely convinced. It's probably just okay. But in specifically an Eliza deck, this can get really scary really fast. Like, if you're able to I don't know how you build your deck around it, but if you're able to consistently get Eliza resolved with Reborn on turn 4, which I don't know how the fuck you're doing, but if you do it, goddamn, and you play this on turn 5, and these things are 3/1s, then yeah, you are really scary. Yeah. Honestly, this card just seems really good if you're missing anything to generate corpses. Corpsicle. Speaking of something to spend those corpses you generate, this card actually really worried me when I first saw it. And I know it was one of the first reveals, but so first up, in Rainbow, this card is nuts. It's a continuous, never-ending corpse spender that also deals direct damage. Sounds perfect to me. But also in Warlock, this card is also nuts. If you're playing an aggressive Warlock deck, this card is insane because you don't spend corpses on anything. So this card basically leverages a resource that you will always have because you never use it. So yeah, this is just a very strong card. But yeah, this card just seems very strong. If it's even like, if it's a mid-range meta, I think this card will be a nightmare. If it's like, this just reminds me of the Frozen Touch spell for Mage. It's not quite as good, but it has more synergies, which is worrying. Okay, next up. Dreadhound Handler. 2 mana, 2/2, rush, death rattle, summon a 1/1 Dreadhound with Reborn. I shouldn't have to say it. This card is absolutely ludicrous. For 2 mana, you're telling me for 2 mana, I get to fight for the board early. I get to generate like 4 corpses in one card. Okay, not 4. I get to generate 3 corpses in one card. And I get to fight for the board early, all in one card. Yes, please. This is as good as Mining Collapse, arguably better in some situations. And just the fact that we're comparing it to Mining Collapse should show you how good this card is. The other advantage this has is it works with the Death Rattle stuff for both Warlock and Death Knight. And not only that, but this also works with the Warlock stuff on a different level because the Warlock stuff has a lot of self-pop stuff. And this is just an amazing enabler for that archetype too. So yeah, this card will see a lot of play across both classes. Next, we're going to Demon Hunter. Okay, next up, Arana Thrillseeker. 5 mana, 5/6, Priest Tourist. Damage your hero takes on your turn is redirected to a random enemy. So, on a base level, this is a very scary card. Yeah, on a base level, this is a very scary card. However, I don't think it's quite as doomsayery as everyone is talking about with it. Because Arana Thrillseeker has a few little problems. And the big one is This is redirected to a random enemy, so you can actually kind of play around it. This isn't like, or this isn't entirely the same as the Demon Seed, which is what most people are comparing it to. This is a lot worse, but this doesn't require nearly as much setup or deck building as the Demon Seed. So it's kind of hard to evaluate. I do think this card will be very playable because the Priest self-damage package is pretty ridiculous, and this is a great enabler for that, or a great like payoff for that. But again, I'm not entirely convinced that this card itself will be what breaks it. It's going to be more that this card gives you access to the Priest cards, and sometimes it'll steal games, which means it's a very strong card. Next up, Patches the Pilot. 1 mana, 1/1. Battle Cries, shuffle 6 parachutes into your deck that summon a 1/1 pirate with charge when drawn. So, when this card was first revealed, I was not convinced it was good yet, because Demon Hunter's set was not revealed, and the main thing I was thinking of, what does modern Demon Hunter do? And the only thing I could think of is use Umpire's Grasp. And this card is very bad with Umpire's Grasp. However, now that we've seen more of the Demon Hunter set and the Shaman set, this card looks a lot better. Like, a lot better. I think this card will see plenty of play in any non-Umpire's Grasp deck. Maybe even in a couple ones that do play the Umpire's Grasp. But, yeah, this card just seems like it has a lot of potential. The main issue is I'm worried, do you have enough cycle to consistently leverage this effect? Because otherwise this card feels like you're like, pray to God I draw it on turn 1. Oh God, pray to God I draw it on turn 1. Because after that it's not nearly as strong. But that doesn't mean it's bad. Climbing Hook, 6 mana 5/2, doesn't lose durability while you control a minion with 5 or more attack. This card at first looks really bad, but what I think works about this card is a neutral in the set that's so there's a 6 mana neutral in the set that's a 6/4 pirate with the effect, if you control a pirate, equip a weapon from your deck. So if you're playing a pirate aggressive deck, that seems like a very solid top end where you can just do, you play your pirate stuff, you generate little 1/1s with charge all the time, and then when you hit turn 6, you play your turn 6 guy because you generated a 1/1 with charge, and then you pull out your Climbing Hook out of your deck since you controlled a pirate, and then you can attack with your Climbing Hook, and your Climbing Hook didn't lose its durability because you have that pirate. Aside from that, I don't think this is good enough at all, actually. Like, besides that, this card is very weak. It is like, it's worse than the Starstrung Bow, and the Starstrung Bow is not very good right now. Next up, Cliff Dive. 6 mana, summon 2 minions from your deck and give them Rush. They go back at the end of the turn. I really like this card. I think it's cool and flavorful. I think it's also very useful for both classes for big strategies, which are archetypes that don't often get a lot of support. Big Shaman and Big Demon Hunter. I think this might be one of the best Big Demon Hunter enablers that we've seen in quite some time. Or it is the best Big Demon Hunter enabler we've seen in quite some time. I also think this card is interesting for weird combos. Yeah. Basically, like, this is the kind of card that you like look at and you're like, how do I abuse this? And those are always fun. The big thing is that in Shaman right now, you can pull out like Walking Mountain with this, and that's like a 16 health point swing, which is kind of incredible. And that's one of the minions. The other one could be literally anything. So yeah, that is worth considering on its own. Dangerous Cliffside. 4 mana, summon 2 1/1s with charge. After your hero attacks, reopen this. I'm assuming, or I'll just say that thank God this thing only has 3 durability. Because if it had any more durability, this thing would be horrifying. On a base level, this is basically 5 mana, summon 4 1/1s with charge and have 1 attack on your hero. That's excluding if you have a weapon previously equipped. And you can even just save it for next turn. So it's like you go 4 mana, get 2, then next turn, attack with your hero, get 2. There is like a lot of potential in this card. And again, if it had more durability, if there was a way to modify durability, this card would be horrifying. As it stands, it's just Very good as an enabler for that aggro deck. Paraglide. Both players draw 3 cards. Outcast, only you do. This card is totally fine. I saw a lot of Doom posting on Twitter because it's like Cold Light Oracle on crack cocaine. Listen, the reason why Cold Light Oracle was good was because you could abuse the effect over and over and over again. Paraglide's a one-time thing. It is a good one-time thing, but it's only a one-time thing. So yeah, this card is solid. It's good in aggro. It's very good in aggro because you'll be dumping your hand as fast as you can, and you'll almost always have this outcast. And it's funny in control, but I wouldn't say it's good. Next up, Skirting Death. This is an interesting card on a few levels. So first up, 3 mana, Skirting Death, choose a minion. This turn, your hero steals 4 attack from it. So in Demon Hunter, this card is interesting as a form of pseudo removal and just big attack. It's kind of like that old get immunity card, but the reason why this is actually good is because in Shaman, you can synergize this with a Wind Fury weapon. There is currently like 2 methods of getting Wind Fury in Shaman, and this card is a very disgusting card for both of those methods. But it also is a shadow spell, which Shaman doesn't often get. So it's another bonus for your cabaret stuff. So this card is a very good Shaman card and a solid Demon Hunter card. All-Terrain Voidhound, 7 mana 5/8. Whenever this attacks, give your hero +5 attack this turn. This card is bad. However, I like that this card is bad because this card makes Shopper DH weaker. And Shopper DH is the most boring version of DH right now. Basically, I wanted to see this set bring more demons that would reduce the consistency of the Shopper pool, and this card does that perfectly. You can also combo with Cliff Dive, and maybe it might be good enough on its own in a big deck, but I am not convinced. As it stands, I'm glad it exists to make Shopper shittier. Adrenaline Fiend. 2 mana 2/2. After a friendly pirate attacks, give your hero +1 attack this turn. This seems very solid for an aggressive deck. It is all about leveraging your board into turning it into more damage. And since you'll be generating a fuckload of chargers, this is another way to generate more damage. And last, and certainly not least, is Sigil of Skydiving. 2 mana at the start of your next turn, 7/3 1/1s with charge. Fell Spell. This card is good for both classes. Not only is it good just because it's a lot of minions on board that help you fight for the early game. Not only is it good because it lets you set up plays with minions on board when you want, but it's also good because it's a Fell Spell, which means that in Shaman it works with your cabaret stuff. So this card just seems like the perfect card for both of these classes right now. If you're playing an aggressive token Shaman or a cabaret Shaman, you want to consider Sigil of Skydiving. It also works amazing with the Tourist, which we'll see later. But yeah. And then in Demon Hunter, this is just a good card if you're playing an aggressive token deck. And oh boy, is it a good card if you're playing that. So yeah, extremely good card. We'll see lots of play in both classes. Mista Vista. 5 mana 5/5, Mage Tourist, Battlecry, in 3 turns, replay every spell you've cast between now and then. So, this card is terrifying. I was looking at the Mage stuff and how it works in Druid, and the problem is that all the cheap Mage stuff is really gross in like Aulonius and Spell Damage Druid. So I was hoping that we'd see a shitty Tourist for Druid, because I didn't want a good enabler for the Aulonius deck. Little did I know we'd get possibly one of the best Tourists, or at least a really good one for value. And if you're playing a combo deck, yeah, this is not a bad effect to just have on hand. So I'm really scared about Aulonius Spell Damage Druid, which can use this and the Mage stuff very well. But aside from that, I think there is cool stuff you can do with this card. This one's interesting because it's like, some of the Tourists are just like, this is a good standalone card. Some of the Tourists are like, this is a cool combo card. And then some of them are like, this is like an alternate win condition. And this is in the alternate win condition camp, just like the Death Knight one, or the Demon Hunter one was. So this card I think is very good. Even like worst case scenario, you recast some ramp. Oh no, I get a whole bunch of extra ramp. The horror. But what else is cool is that you can use this in like a big spell Druid. And I think this is what they want you to do with it. And I think that will be fun. Because they did get some interesting support to make a big spell Druid. Because you can use the Mage big spell stuff and this and the existing big spells in Druid to make a fun little deck. Next up, Cruise Captain Laura, 7 mana 4/5, Battlecry summon 2 random locations. So we'll actually do. Oh yeah, we do get to see all the locations. So I already did this count of like all the locations available. And from what I saw, this card seems like it'll be very solid most of the time. There are only like 1 or 2 actual whiffs. There are only 1 or 2 actual whiffs. Lorinda, thank you so much for the raid. We're doing our big old set review. But yeah, so Cruise Captain Laura, I think, is good enough to consider in a ramp deck. And because Druid got really good ramp, you're going to want to play this and, what's it called? The dumbass Toyrantis. So I think that we will see this card see some play. Sleep Under the Stars. Choose thrice. Draw 2. Gain 5. Refresh 3. So I always love versatility. And this card is extremely versatile. You can play it in Warrior. You can play it in you can play it in Druid. What does it do? It's very simple. This is 2 mana. This is draw 1 for 2 mana. Draw 2 for 1 mana. Jesus. You can like gain 5 for 1 mana. That's not very good. But you can also do like any sort of weird combination. You can draw 2, gain 5, refresh 3, which means 4 mana, draw 2, gain 5. That's pretty solid. It's not perfect, but it's not terrible. You can refresh 9, which would be weird. You can draw 4 for 4 mana. That's pretty good. You can gain 10 for 4 mana. That's kind of interesting. This just has a lot of good versatility in how you use it. The other thing is that with Warrior, this has additional bonuses because they gain 5 armor. It can be leveraged in Odin. But yeah, overall, I think this card is very cool and very like versatile. And yeah, he does pair nicely with Mista Vista. Next up, New Heights. This is probably the single scariest card they revealed. 3 mana, increase your maximum mana by 3 and gain an empty mana crystal. That's right, 3 mana Wild Growth did rotate. It did, right? It did, right? With Malfurion's Gift and now New Heights, it's like 3 mana Wild Growth never went away. This card seems very good to me because on a base level, it's 3 mana Wild Growth. However, you'll never get the card draw, which is kind of interesting. But you get to increase your maximum mana, which is very funny. The fact that this also is being given to Warrior is actually the weirdest part, or rather the most worrying part. Like, this is effectively premium ramp being given to Warrior. And Warrior has a lot of big tools for this expansion, so I actually would not be surprised if these big tools actually work for once. Because Warrior's weakness for doing big strats was always not having enough mana to do your big strats. But now they get premium ramp. In Druid, I'm assuming there's some hilarious combos you can do. I will say, though, it's funny this does not work with Audio Amplifier because Audio Amplifier sets it to 11. So this will actually fight with Amplifier. So do not play Amplifier if you're playing New Heights. Next up, Hydration Station. 8 mana, resurrect your 3 highest cost taunt minions. So this card I actually like on a few levels. So first of all, it works with what Warrior's doing, which is like this big taunt strategy. It works with what Druid wants to do with like this big spell strategy. And it also works with the Mage stuff, because the Mage stuff can help synergize to make big taunt, big spell Druid work. So I like this card a lot. I don't know if it's actually good, but it is cool. And I like the design space it holds. 5 mana, 3/5, Dozing Dragon. Dormant for 2 turns. While dormant, summon a 3/5 with taunt at the end of your turn. This card just seems very strong for a bunch of different reasons. So, first of all, this is a dragon in your hand, so it activates all your dragon synergies. Second of all, this is a lot of fucking stall in one card. This is 2 3/5s, and then a third 3/5, but the first two have taunt. Yeah, this just seems extremely good. Like, I can see this have a home in both classes very easily, in multiple strategies. Like, if you're playing any form of Amalgam Warrior, you could consider this. If you're playing any form of, if you're playing any dragon deck where you use Druid deck where you use dragons as a package, I think this is better than the 4 mana deal 5, the Rottennest Drake. Is that Rottennest Drake? No. The 4 mana deal, the 4 mana 5/4 deal 5 dragon. I think this is better than that in most situations. Yeah, this card is just very strong. Next up, Hiking Trail. 3 mana, discover top minion. After you gain armor, reopen this. So, this was the first location for this expansion revealed, and I'm gonna be real, it is still probably the weakest. It is a value bomb, and it's good that it exists in the random pool, but I don't know if you actually run this. However, the weird thing is that because of all the ramp with stuff like New Heights, there might actually be a world where you consider this just because you're floating so much mana that you need something to fill your mana. So this might see play just for that reason. But I wouldn't count on it. Next up, the Bouldering Buddy. 7 mana, 6/7, Rush Taunt. Costs 1 if you have at least 10 mana crystals. This seems very good. On a base level, if you wanted to do a Taunt Warrior or Druid, you wanted Elementals with Taunt because now you can play Thunderbringer, and you already had Beasts with Taunt. So now you have Beasts and Elementals with Taunt that both synergize with your deck. And Bouldering Buddy is an amazing middle ground for both because not only is it good in your hand, it's also good in your deck. So I think this card will see plenty of play. Also, because you got more ramp, this card is a lot easier to enable for 1 mana. Traveler, 3 mana 1/5, Taunt, Death Rattle, draw another Taunt minion, reduce its cost by 2. This is really strong. What I like about this card in both classes is that you can use this as a tutor, so you can kind of plan out how many Taunt minions you play to maximize like this effect. On a base level, this thing seems really solid though. Like I'm imagining in this deck I was talking about with Bouldering Buddy, use this, you tutor out your Thunderbringer, you play it for 6 mana, you were at 6 mana on turn 3, you win the game. Okay, you wouldn't be at 6 mana on turn 3. On turn 4. Next up, Trail Mix, 2 mana, gain 2 mana crystals next turn only. So this card is interesting. As it stands, I'm not like super convinced in Druid specifically, but in Warrior, I think this card actually will see play. Now, if you're playing cards like Bouldering Buddy, you need to hit the 10 mana cost threshold. So there might be games where it's like, I'm on 8 mana, I play Trail Mix. Even though I lose 2 mana this turn, I get the benefit of getting 1 mana 6/7s with Taunt next turn. And that is probably worth it. Granted, actually, you can do that on turn 7. And then when you hit turn 8, you'd be at 10 mana. So yeah. I think there is like, this card seems solid for both classes, but the issue with this card is that it's like the Mana Biscuit for Mage, but unlike the Mana Biscuit lets you refresh those mana crystals whenever you wanted. This is specifically you have to do it next turn, and that I think makes it a lot weaker than the Mana Biscuit. But this does have the little synergies of being a nature spell and enabling these kind of, if you have 10 mana crystal cards. I don't know how many we have in standard. The Giant's the only one, or the Elemental's the only one I can think of, but that's something to be aware of if you're evaluating this card. Next up, Ranger Gilly. So I talked about how some of the tourists are like alternate win conditions in themselves. Some of the tourists are like interesting, weird cards. Ranger Ghillie is neither of those. Ranger Ghillie is a cost to get access to the warrior cards, unfortunately. I think this card is a little too slow. And even though some of the warrior cards have cool synergies in warrior or in hunter, I'm not convinced that this guy is that good. Yeah, the big thing hurting this guy is that he doesn't have a minion tag. And I don't know what you'd give him, but the other thing that hurts is like 6 mana for a 4/6 body is just not good. At first I thought this guy summoned a 2/3 Crocolisk, and I was like, oh, that's actually pretty decent. But the fact that he like adds it to your hand makes him a lot less appealing. And yeah, I'm just not convinced this card is that good. But some of the warrior cards are worth running in your hunter deck. So this is a card you're gonna have to put up with for that benefit. The other ones I think that are like this is like the rogue one is like this too. But the rogue one's a lot more interesting than this guy. Next up, the Sasquatch. 7 mana 4/5. Battle Cry. Repeat each card you played last turn. I love this card. So first of all, really cool synergy in Hunter. You have the toy egg or whatever it is, the miniature egg, and then this thing basically becomes 2 mana 4/5. And this effect at 2 mana is a lot more appealing than at 7 mana. But even at 7 mana, there are certain decks and classes where you want this kind of effect. The obvious example would be in Priest. If you're playing a big Priest, this is a really sick enabler for a big Priest. Even just like following up an Amanthul with Sasquatch just seems insane to me. And the Priest Tourist is a lot more splashable than Ghillie is. But yeah, I like this card a lot. Very cool. Good in both classes. I'm excited to see what people do with it. And next up is probably the best card to use with it. Death Roll. Holy shit. 5 mana, destroy an enemy minion, deal damage equal to its attack, randomly split amongst all enemies. This card is horrifying if we're playing in a buff meta. Oh my lord, is this insane. So I shouldn't have to say why, but if we're playing a meta where 1 or 2 cards get super buffed, this is basically 5 mana, destroy your enemy minion, clear the board, and ping them for a little bit. Every class wants this card. Or a card like this. Hunter, this is the first time they've gone like straight up targeted destroy enemy minion without any drawback or condition. And my god, what a strong one to get. Also, this card is nuts in Priest. Not quite as nuts, but it is worth considering. Especially since the Priest Tourist is so easy to play in your deck anyway. Next up, Chatty Macaw, 3 mana 3/3, Battlecry, repeat the last spell you cast at an enemy, at a random enemy if possible. This also seems good if it's that kind of meta, because it can let you leverage the Death Roll or any other targeted spell for extra value. For Priest, I'm not exactly sure how good this is. Like, you can do stuff like Holy Smite, the 4 mana... Actually, probably the best use for this is the 4 mana Shade Leaf. The one that's like 4 mana, deal 10 damage to an enemy minion, add a 1/1 bottle to your hand. Like, I'm just imagining you play the Shade Leaf on 4, you play this on 5, and then you have 2 little bottles that can ping off whatever's left. So, yeah, this card actually seems pretty solid in Priest, too. Furious Foul, 6 mana, choose an enemy, summon 2/3/2 birds with immune while attacking to attack it. Hey, Titus wanted a card that I think is pack filler. I think this is pack filler. I think this is really not a good card. I think I get what they were going for. They wanted like this big spell idea in Hunter, and they wanted it to work with a face damage card in Priest to kind of give access to 2 things that both classes normally don't get. But the end result is a lot less interesting than Death Roll. Yeah, so I don't think this card will see a lot of play. I don't know if I'll even be wrong. Normally I'd say maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm gonna take a stand. I'm gonna stand my ground and say that this card is ass. All right, next up. Bird Watching. For a card that is not ass, I like this card a lot. 2 mana, discover a minion from your deck, give all copies of it +2/+1 wherever they are. I think this card is good in both classes. If you're playing any form of like combo deck, this is super intriguing. I'm thinking in Priest, if you're playing Astral Automata, you probably want this card because this gets you Astral Automata and it buffs you Astral Automata, which is great. And there's a couple other cards that support that archetype, and we might see them see play. Is there any way to revive Astral Automata in Standard? I can't think of one right now, but just be aware that Automata might be back to some degree. Parrot Sanctuary. This is a strong location for both classes as well. I shouldn't have to say it, but reducing a battle cry by 1 is never terrible. Now, granted, I say this, but the 2 mana Shaman Hammer that did this back in United in Stormwind wasn't super played. So maybe I'm over-evaluating this card. Maybe it's not as good. Either way, I think it is worth considering in like either class's Reno strats. Because I'm thinking like, if you're playing Reno Priest, being able to play Elise on 7 is a lot better than Elise on 8. And Elise on 8 wins most of your games. So, yeah, this card could be a shoo-in for Elise decks. And then at the same time, Feldrin for 3 mana is very nice. So 3 mana, 1/2 weapon. After your hero attacks, summon a 1-cost minion from your deck. This seems good. If you're playing either class, you want to be able to leverage 1-cost. Like, this card basically encourages you to think about how you play your 1-cost minions in your deck. And I like these kind of cards a lot. If you're playing Astral Automata Priest, this is amazing. If you're playing Aggro Priest, this is probably worth considering too. If you're playing Aggro Hunter, this might be worth considering. This reminds me a lot of Boogie Down pre-nerf. And Boogie Down pre-nerf was very, very good. So it's like, imagine Boogie Down, but you only summon 1/1 at a time, but you get to trade into things. And I think that's a lot better than just summoning 2 1-costs immediately. Plus, the 1-costs that you have access to in Hunter and Priest are a lot better than the ones you did in Paladin. Next up, Pet Parrot. 2 mana, 1/1. Repeat the last 1-cost card you played. This card is extremely good in Astral Automata Priest. It's also good in any like weird Hunter deck you want to play. I'm assuming this will show you, like when you're hovering over it in your hand, what the last 1-cost card you played was. Either way, this is an interesting card. And I think it will see play. And last for Hunter, Catch of the Day. 1 mana, 3/3, Rush, Battlecry, summon a 2/1 worm for your opponent. Is this good? Yes. Especially if you can play without its Battlecry, which you can with the Fishing Rod. So I think that like any deck that are gonna play the Fishing Rod are basically gonna be like 2 Fishing Rod, 2 Catch of the Day, and then 2 or 4 1-cost minions that you want to tutor for specific benefits. So like in Priest, you can either do Automata or you can do the new 1 mana Pirate. But yeah, depending on if you're playing Aggro or Automata. So I think this card is very good. Next up is Mage with the Paladin Tourist, Rayla Sand Sculptor. So I like this card quite a bit. I've talked about this card quite a bit. But basically this is play Paladin cards in your Mage deck at the cost of getting the greatest version of Violet Teacher ever printed. And that is a cost many people would be willing to pay. Yeah, I don't know what else to add. There's a lot of the Paladin stuff works with this very well, like the Sunscreen stuff, the Brew card for Paladin, even the Brew card for Mage works with this very well. There's just a lot of good little synergies with this card right now. Next up is King Tide. 4 mana, 4/4. Both players' spells cost 5 until the end of your next turn. So now that we've seen Druid, this card is ridiculous. I was scared about this card before because on a base level, this card is very good in Mage, either big spell or not big spell. But in theory, this card is insane in Druid because if you play it on like turn 10 and you follow it up with a 6-mana play, then you basically paralyze your opponent for the turn. For 1 turn. And then you get to cheat something out the next turn if you're playing a big spell Druid. But even then, this might be worth it in non-big spell decks just to paralyze potential combo mirror matches. So like, let's say that the one thing I'm scared of, which is spell damage Druid with Mage cards, gets, you're playing the mirror match, and it's basically whoever can set up their combo and resolve King Tide first wins the game. So it's like, oh, I have most of my combo. I'll just play King Tide because my opponent might have their full combo. And then, oh, I drew my last combo piece, and my opponent couldn't do anything. Time for my turn to kill you. Actually, no, it doesn't quite work like that because it's until the end of your next turn. It wouldn't actually be that good in that situation. Granted, if you're playing big spell Druid and you use this to stun your opponent's combo deck, this is still absurd. As a rogue player, this card makes me very sad. Tsunami, this is 8 mana, summon 3/6 water elementals that freeze, they attack random enemies. This might be one of the best big spells ever printed in terms of just generic utility. This works amazing with the Druid Tourist. This works amazing with the Druid Ramp stuff. This works amazing with the Big Mage stuff. This card just seems really fucking good. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. This is a good card. Next up, go with the flow. This card scares me quite a bit. Choose a minion. If it's an enemy, freeze it. If it's friendly, give it spell damage +1. So, in Mage, I don't think this card is that good. But in Druid, I think this card is very scary because now you can play like Alonius combo decks. And if you're able to go with the flow on your Alonius, then that's like +4 spell damage, at least. That's excluding any other things you have. So this thing can get really dumb really fast. But in Mage right now, at least, I'm not convinced it's any good. Under the Sea. Okay, so this is a good big spell enabler for both classes, both Mage and Druid. And I'm glad it's printed. We might see big spell be a real deck for both classes. Next up, the Surfalapod. A hilarious flavor and pretty strong effect, honestly. Like, obviously they want you to do Surfalapod into small spell package with Under the Sea. So you draw with Under the Sea and then immediately cast when drawn whatever you drew. And if that's like the 8-mana Druid spell, you get a bunch of taunts and you summon a random 8-drop on top of that. Or if it's the Tsunami, you get a bunch of 3/6s and summon an 8-drop. Stuff like that. So this card, I think, has a lot of potential. And it's got some really gross high rolls. You can do the Sunset Showdown or whatever, the 9-mana spell. So it's like Surfalapod into Under the Sea, summon a 9-drop, summon a 10-drop, deal 10 damage. That seems pretty gross. All on turn 6. Rising Waves. 3 mana, deal 2 damage to all minions. If none die, deal 2 more. So my hot take is this card is not very good, specifically in Mage, but it may see play in Druid. And the reason why is because if you're playing a spell damage Druid deck, you can really get this spell damage total to be basically always clear the board. So you have the location and it's like deal 3 damage to all minions. If none die, deal 3 more. That's pretty gross. You might even have a second location out. But in Mage, if this had a type, I think you'd consider it. But because this doesn't have a spell school, I don't think you play it. Good in Arena, though. Next up, Maroon Archmage. 3 mana, 3/3. Your first spell each turn costs 2 less. So, I don't know exactly what deck plays this the more I think about it. But this card just seems good. Like, it's basically the shitty summoner from Classic, but way better because it doesn't count as the first thing you do. So this is basically always a 1 mana 3/3 if you're playing it correctly in the right deck. Now, what decks could use a 1 mana 3/3? Would a big spell deck use a 1 mana 3/3? Maybe, because this is like cheating out your big spell, but not actually cheating it out. You're like, that's the weird part, is like you have to like not cheat it out the turn you play it. But even then, in a regular Mage deck, I'm imagining you play this on 3, you go Infinitize the Maxitude. That feels pretty good. I just don't know like if there's room for a card like this. So yeah, I think this card is not as good as it first seems. Next up, Tide Pools. 3 mana, discover a spell that costs 3 or less. After you cast a spell, reopen this. So this is just a good card in both classes. In most decks. Yeah, you're just playing this. This is a good card. I don't even know what else to add. It's just, this does a lot. If you're playing a spell damage combo deck, this gives you more cheap spells. If you're playing a big spell deck, this actually does have the benefit of giving you a bonus for every time you cast a big spell that helps you fill out your mana curve, which is a problem that you're going to have sometimes. Next up, the Sea Breeze Chalice. 1 mana, deal 2 damage, randomly split amongst all enemies, 3 drinks left. This is one of the best drinks, and the reason why is because this works with Alonius OTK. Again, one of the reasons I'm so scared of that Alonius deck is that this card is basically really gross. Like, we talked about that go with the flow. So you have your Alonius, go with the flow, you're at like 10 mana, and then each of your Sea Breeze Chalices deal like, instead of 2, they're dealing like 8 or something like that. I didn't do the math, but they're dealing quite a bit more. And you're able to turn this into a full-blown OTK / board clear. You combo that with a swipe or 2, and if they had a board, they don't. And if they had a face, they don't. Coley IP, the animation better be fast. True. Next up, Paladin. Paladin, I think, is one of the most interesting classes. So first up, Sunsapper Lanessa. Rogue Tourist. Your spells that cost 2 or less, cast twice. I'm actually excited to goof around with Paladin for the first time in a long time, because a lot of the rogue tools let you play a ramp package in Paladin, which is super cool. Yeah. I don't know what else to add. Like, this card just, like, there's that 2 mana rogue spell that's like combo, deal 2, get a coin. With Sunsapper Lanessa, that becomes 7 mana, deal 4 damage, refresh 4 mana. And that seems pretty decent. Paladin is more rogue than rogue this expansion. You're not entirely wrong, but yeah. Even the seashell lady, I think is super interesting for Paladin decks because she lets you basically ramp out big Paladin stuff too. So yeah, I think this card is super cool, and I like what the rogue stuff enables in this deck. Next up, San Kazel. This card is just good. If you're playing a hand buff deck, this is good. If you're playing a big deck, this is good. If you're playing a Paladin deck, this is good. I don't know what else to say. This is good. You can also pull it out with Pipsy. You can do a lot with this card, and I really like it. So I'm excited to see what people do with it. And it also fixes one of the biggest problems with big Paladin, which is, oh no, I summoned a big minion, but it can't affect the board. So now your San Kazel basically becomes affect the board, get a location, which lets your next big minion actually affect the board. And that is a good thing. 10 mana, Sea Shanty, summon 3 5/5 pirates, cost 1 less for each spell you've cast on characters in this game. So in Paladin, I'm actually not convinced this is that good, but in Mage, this is actually pretty interesting. Because the casting spells on characters can work on their face too. And the Mage stuff, the Paladin stuff is all about buffing your own stuff, but the Mage stuff is all about hitting your opponent in the face in an aggressive deck. So you can have this weird buff Mage deck that can leverage this as like a big payoff at the end. I don't know if it'll be good, but it is intriguing. Next up, Service Ace. 3 mana 3/3. After this minion gains attack, reduce the cost of the highest cost card in your hand by 1. I think this card is actually pretty interesting, and it's probably the most unique form of mana cheat that Paladin has gotten. But it's going to be hard to play effectively because, like, you have to work buffs in with it. Now, there is stuff you can do to make it work. San Kazil is probably, like, one of the sickest enablers, but I really like this card, and I'm really excited to try to get this card to work in Mage and in Paladin. Because in Mage, you can use all the new stuff from this set, all the new Paladin stuff from this set to buff this guy like crazy, reduce all your spells by, or reduce your big stuff by a lot, and then you're able to like scam out a bunch of stuff. So I think we could see this like weird buff Mage deck that could be funny. Next up, Lifeguard. 4 mana, 2/7, taunt, battlecry. The next spell you cast has lifesteal. So I was looking at this card for a while, and in Paladin, I don't really think there's anything too good with it. Like, there's Consecrate, and there's technically Prismatic Beam, which is good, but not, like, insane, you know? Like, it is lifesteal, and it's not bad, but I looked at Mage, and there's one card that jumped out at me and made me realize, holy shit, that has amazing synergy with this card. And that is Star Power. So if you don't know what Star Power does, it's a 5 mana arcane spell that's for Mage and Hunter that deals 5 damage and then repeats until 1. So it deals 15 damage to the enemy board. So, in any control deck, in any Mage control deck, you can play Lifeguard on turn 4. Your opponent attacks it and then hurts you. And if you're alive, they lose their board and you gain 15 health. Now, call me crazy, but summoning a 2/7 taunt into 15 damage life points, or into a 30 health life point swing and board clear seems really good to me. Especially being able to do that on turn 4 and turn 5. So yeah, I think Mage Control could actually use this card very well. Next up, Divine Brew. If you're playing this buff stuff, I think this card is super cool. But even if you're not playing the buff stuff, this is just a really cool holy spell enabler. Because it can buff your face and then buff your face to attack as well. So you can kind of use it as like a trading tool, but also giving yourself Divine Shield on your face, like the Disco card. And the Disco card is probably my favorite art in the game, but there might be a world where you even combo both cards together for a very wacky super heal play. I like it a lot. It's also a very good drink card. Yeah, I like it. Next up, Life Saving Aura. Another cheap buff spell. This is really good if you're playing like any... Like, here's the other thing that I like about this and Divine Brew is that both of these cards could see play in Sith Mage, actually. Because Sith Mage likes giving its face Divine Shield. Likes getting access to holy spells. So yeah, now you get access to holy spells in your Sith Mage. And you get cheap spells if you want to do other stuff. Maybe not Life Saving Aura, but I could definitely see Divine Brew in Sith Mage. And there is one other card that you'd want to play in Sith Mage in this pack. So it's like you could play like a Sith Mage where you play like Lifeguard, Star Power, Divine Brew, maybe Life Saving Aura if you want. You don't play Power Spike. I don't think this card's very good. It's just too expensive and too awkward. But you can play the Grill Master, and this card is insane to me. So this card is like, if you are building a Paladin deck in the future, hell, if you are building a Mage deck in the future, there is a non-zero chance that you will start by putting this card in your deck and thinking, do I want to cut this card while you're deck building? Because this card is a sick tutor for anything you do. So that Sith Mage I was talking about, Grill Master fixes the biggest problem with Sith Mage, which is, oh no, I didn't draw my Sith on time. Now, you can draw your cheap burn spell or holy spell and your Sith all in one card. If you're playing Highlander, this lets you tutor your Reno. If you're playing even a hand buff deck, this lets you tutor the Living Horizon, which was a card that did see play sometimes, but the biggest problem was you didn't have enough card draw. But now that you can tutor it and instantly get it into your hand with 2 draws so that you'll always have a lot of cards in your hand. Living Horizon, I think, will be a staple in hand buff decks, thanks to the Grill Master. So I think this is actually the best Paladin card in the set. This card is super good. And then last is Volley Maul. So 3 mana, after your hero attacks, give a 1-cost sunscreen that gives +1/+2. So on a base level, this card is interesting. The problem is that Paladin has the hand buff weapon that is just way better, so you're not going to use this. However, Mage never gets weapons. So this actually might be worth it in an aggressive Mage deck where you want to actually use weapons to leverage a different advantage that you normally can't. And this weapon is not bad. And in Mage that normally never gets weapons, this might actually be worth considering. So Chillin' Vol'jin is the tourist for Priest. This card is just good. I don't know what else to say. This card is just good. 3 mana, 3/3. Choose 2 minions, swap their stats. I will say one thing though. This card is kind of boring. It is good though. This is basically the Mimiron's Gizmo, and the Mimiron's Gizmo can steal games. So having this effect on a body just seems solid. But again, this is kind of boring because it's like, it doesn't synergize with what either class is doing. It's just, here's a powerful effect. Play cards. Next up, Narain Soothe Fancy. I like this card a lot. 4 mana, 4/4. Get 2 fortunes that are copies of the top card of your deck. So most people are talking about this in Priest, and that's the obvious home. But in Demon Hunter, I think you could do some interesting stuff with like a Highlander Demon Hunter deck. I'm just imagining you're playing Demon Hunter, and you go Narain Soothe Fancy, and then next turn you get your 2 fortunes show that you're top decking on turn 5, or that on turn 6 you're going to top deck the Gunslinger Kurtrus. So then you get your copy of Gunslinger Kurtrus for free, and then on turn 6 you play your actual Gunslinger Kurtrus, and you've completely obliterated your opponent's hand, and they are dead. So I think this card is pretty cool in both classes. It also has some cool inter-synergies, which we'll talk about in a sec, but yeah, I like it. Sensory Deprivation, 6 mana, summon a copy of an enemy minion. If you have 20 or less health, destroy the original. This is an interesting support card for Self-Damage Priest. So the problem is that I don't know if you actually want to run this. Like, it is strong, don't get me wrong, if we're playing a meta where you buff 1 minion, but I don't know if we will be. I don't know if you will be. This is just summon a copy, or it's like bad mind control, basically, if you reach the condition. Which isn't bad, but is bad mind control worth playing something that's probably going to be a very aggressive deck? I don't think so. But if you're playing a control deck in Demon Hunter, this might actually be worth considering. However, in Priest, I'm actually not convinced this is good. Twilight Medium, 6 mana, 5/6. Taunt. Battle Cries, set the cost of the top card in your deck for 1. Seems very good in Priest, but it could also be good in a controlled Demon Hunter. I want to say more good in Priest than it is in Demon Hunter, but maybe you're playing like Highlander Demon Hunter, and you use the Soothsayer as well. And this card just lets you scam out some dumb shit. That could be funny. Or a big deck even. That could be funny. Yeah, so in both classes, I think this card is good and interesting. Also, worth being aware of, on turn 8, if you have a tradable, you can go Twilight Medium, trade, get a 1-drop. Play the 1-drop. Or get a 1-cost card. Play the 1-cost card. That could be good. This type of archetype needs more support. And yeah, there is that neutral that stacks the top of your deck, but I don't know how good that card is. And that card, you really have to plan it out, because it's like, you have to go, next turn I don't draw, next turn it won't be affected by the medium. You have to have the middle one be affected by the medium, or the last one, depending on how you play it out. So you have to like really think with that, and that's cool. Next up, the Sauna Regulator, 5 mana, 5/5. Taunt, costs 1 less for each time your hero is taking damage on your turn. I know people are worried about this card because this kind of effect has always traditionally been strong, but even with all the self-damage enablers, specifically in Priest, I am not convinced this is that good. Now in Demon Hunter, that might be a different story, because you can also combo this with weapon attacks. And being able to combo both of those means that maybe this is good enough in Demon Hunter. Next up, Rest in Peace, 3 mana shadow spell. Each player summons their highest cost minion that died this game. So as it stands, I'm not convinced there's a lot of good stuff to go with this, but the obvious good thing is Aman'Thul. Aman'Thul is very super spooky with this, because whatever they revive, you clear right away. I do like this card, and this card's interesting because this card is good if the meta is aggressive, but it's bad if the meta is slow. Ooh, I didn't think of that, Undercast. Magtheridon is pretty interesting with this. But yeah, overall, I like this card. This is probably the most interestingly designed revive spell, because most of the time revive spells are like, they're cancer. Let's be real, they're cancer. So this one I think is like a good middle ground between, like, you have to think about when you play it, and it's also pretty good. Also, because it only summons highest cost, that means you can limit what it summons. Next up, Nightshade Tea. 2 mana, deal 3 damage to a minion, deal 2 damage to your hero. So the problem with this card is that if you want to... This card's awkward because if you want to play self-damage stuff, you want it to go more face. But if you want to play control stuff, there's probably better tools than this. I'm not convinced this is super good in either class. So, you know what? Pack filler. But I will say, randomly generating this in Rogue will be very nice. Next up, Hot Coals! 3 mana. Deal 2 to all enemies if your hero took damage. This turn, deal 1 more. This just seems good. Both classes can use this pretty well. It's Consecrate on a base level plus bonus if you achieve very easy condition for both classes. Yeah. And next up are the 2 crazy enablers for this aggro, for the self-damage archetype. Acupuncture. This is just a lot of damage. Even though I'm not convinced it's super good, this is just a lot of damage. I don't think this sees play in like an aggressive priest deck. I do think this sees play in an aggressive demon hunter deck. And Brain Masseuse. 1 mana, 2/4. Whenever this takes damage, also deal that to your hero. This seems decent for both classes. Now, the problem is, as good as this is theoretically in aggro, this kind of effect can actually backfire horrifically. So just be aware that this isn't always as good as it looks. This is a 1-drop that you want to play on turn 1, and it is sick on turn 1. But after turn 1, you can actually get really punished by this. And next up, my baby, Rogue. So, first up, we have the Warlock Tourist, Maestra Mask Merchant. And I'm going to talk about this card for a bit, because this card does a lot of interesting things, but it also has an interesting cost to it. So, interesting things it does. First up, discovering a hero card is an effect we've never seen before. And there are some real bangers here, like Guff is insane. Zul'jin can be very funny. Reno is Reno. If you're not playing a weapon, what's her name? Cariel can be game-breakingly good. Anyway, you get the idea. There are some really banging ones, but there are some total ass ones too. Yeah, thank God it's Discover. The problem is that this is a 6-mana card that's discovering a 5 or higher cost card. That is a lot. That is a lot to ask. Now, you can cheat this out with the Scoundrel a little bit, But even then, like, this is a lot of awkward body stuff. So it's like, you pay 6 mana for a 6/5 to basically pass your turn to hopefully get a hero card that hopefully does a lot. And there are some that do, but there are some that don't. So, the real interesting thing about this card isn't even the second line of text. It's the first line of text. By being the Warlock tourist, just by getting access to Warlock cards, it doesn't even matter what they are, Rogue gets a really cool ability that it's never had before with its burgle stuff. So, traditionally, when you play a burgle card, what is the cost of burgling? The cost of burgling is you pay 1 or 2 mana for a spell that does nothing to get a card that does something, or enable another card that does something. But you're still paying to not do anything. Now, by being the Warlock tourist, Burgle Rogue now has the ability to enable cards by skipping that first step. You get a card that instantly does something. And that card that does something will instantly enable your Burgle synergies. So, like, let's look at Velorok, for example. When you play Velorok, you have to play Stick Up or the Creation, and that's like a card that barely does anything, and then you do something, and then you get Velorok. But with Maestra, you skip a step. Just by playing the Warlock cards, whatever they are, your Burgle stuff is enabled. Now, there isn't a lot of Burgle synergies, but this is worth considering in your head when you're evaluating all the Burgle cards now, while this is in Standard. Because this card basically says some of your Burgle cards will operate with 1 less trigger. Now granted, the Warlock cards themselves aren't great, but there is cool synergies that I will talk about in a bit, and when we get there. But that is the big thing you have to consider when you're evaluating this card specifically, is that the ability to get access to the Warlock class on a basic level is a lot more powerful in Rogue than it is in other classes. Next up, Treasure Hunter Eudora. 6 mana 4/5, Battlecry, go on a side quest to discover amazing loot. Play 3 cards from other classes to complete it. So, this card kind of already talks about the issue that we were talking about with... and in order to... So once you play 3 cards, you'll discover 2 pieces of Duel's treasures. These are very good cards all across the board. It's basically, you get 1 pip of Kazakhstan. And that seems very strong. And it's directly in your hand too, not in your deck. So, why is this card interesting? There's a few reasons. In Rogue, this card is interesting because, like we were talking about before, the Warlock cards automatically enable it, technically. Which means that this might be easier to activate than it looks. But the real interesting thing is this in Paladin. Because now your Rogue cards will enable this effect. Now, the Rogue cards for Paladin, as we're going to go over, are actually pretty interesting, most of them. But this is one where it's like you get a sick payoff if you're playing a Paladin Rogue deck. But if you're playing just a regular Paladin deck, or sorry, just a regular Rogue deck, you do get some interesting stuff here that can be pretty cool to enable. Now the problem is, just like Maestra, this is 6 mana do nothing. And that is a hard ask. But I think that this might in some ways be better than Maestra, because your 6 mana do nothing gets you a sick payoff immediately, instead of like, I'd argue that getting a hero card from the past is cute. Getting 2 Duel's treasures that you choose is great. Now, this is harder to resolve, but if you're playing a Burgle Rogue, this is correct. Like, this is just easier. Or, not this is easier to do than it looks. And then like we talked about before in Paladin, this card is actually pretty interesting. But we'll get to that in a sec with a little other cards. Next up is Snatch and Grab. So destroy 2 random enemy minions, cost 1 less for each card you've played from another class. So in Rogue, if it weren't for the Warlock Tourist, I would consider this card not very good. Not good at all, actually. But in Rogue, there is, because we have the Warlock stuff, if you're playing enough of it, this can actually be pretty easy to enable. Also with your standard generate random cards that you do. So I think that this card is actually pretty fairly costed, and I can very easily see you get down to 4 or even 3 by like turn 6 if you play a Burgle deck correctly. And the problem is that there might not be a world where you want to do this kind of removal. But I'd argue in Rogue, you do want this kind of removal, especially because it's popping 2, so it's almost a board clear. If you can somehow build a deck where you're able to consistently get this down to 0 and then also play Dubious Purchase, you're able to just actually pop their whole board in the best way you can. But in Paladin, I think this card is actually super interesting because every rogue card you play reduces this. And since every rogue card you play reduces this, then you actually do want to play a weird little rogue package. Swarthy Short Sword Shiner, at least from what I can see, this is the only card that is 100% for rogue, because currently Paladin doesn't really have a weapon that wants to use this, except for maybe the hand buff one, and you'd use this on the last durability, but rogue does have a weapon that you'd want to use this right out the gate, and that's Quick Pick. Oh my god, is Quick Pick gross with this thing. Holy shit. You go Quick Pick, you attack, next turn, you go Swarthy, you go 3/3s. Oh god, that is disgusting. This might be a whole draw package for Rogue that they just play to be good. None of the other weapons are quite as good. Like, I guess you could do Bloodrock Shovel, but that kind of gets in the way. And Metal Detector is decent, but the problem is that it's a 3 mana base cost, so it's not that appealing to do this on turn 4. But Painter's Virtue on last durability is insane with this because you buff this idiot, and then yeah, now you give this 3/3. Horn of the Windlord is funny, but I don't think you can actually do it. Yeah. So I think this card is solid, but it's mostly for Rogue. You might see it in Paladin, but I doubt it. Mainly, the reason why I don't think you see this in Paladin is because if you're playing the Rogue, or sorry, if you're playing the Paladin Tourist, the Lanessa, she wants you to play spells, but if you're playing spells, you don't want to play hand buff. So yeah, as good as this is with Painter's Virtue, I'm not convinced you'd want to do that, you know? Or, like, maybe this is so good with Painter's Virtue that you're willing to just play Lanessa with no other spells. Conniving Conman, this one's kind of bad, but it does have interesting implications. So, 4 mana 4/4, replay the last card you've played from another class. Obviously, you want to use like a 3-cost card, preferably with a Death Rattle card. Yeah, so like there is the Death Rattle card in Warlock you could use with this. There's no real, like, you could duplicate something in Rogue card in Paladin with this, which is kind of funny. But I'm not convinced this is very good. If the Warlock Death Rattle minion was better, I think this, for Rogue, then this would be pretty decent. But as it stands, it's just not very good. And none of the like what? Are you gonna get another Knickknack Shack in Paladin? I guess, maybe. Are you gonna get another Metal Detector? Actually, you could. This actually isn't bad. You go Metal Detector, attack twice. And then you go Conniving Conman to get a free Metal Detector in Paladin. That's actually not terrible, especially if you're leveraging like coin. But the problem is that like that's like the only good synergy, and I don't think that that's worth it. Knickknack Shack. This card might change how Rogue is played in general, This is basically just in any kind of rogue deck that's built around it. You just have to try to build around it. Also, this plus the Cove might make like the location giant be good in rogue, because you're able to get 4 durabilities off of this pretty easy if you build your deck right. And then Crystal Cove is not bad to begin with, especially with some of the other cards in this set and expansion. So yeah, I think this card is very solid. Very good even. Even in Paladin, you could play like an aggressive Paladin with a tiny rogue package and use the Knick-Knack Shack for cycle. And Metal Detector I was talking about before, I don't think this card is good in rogue now, but I do think this card is good in Paladin. If you're playing a big Paladin, you can ramp. And big Paladin loves the idea of ramping, as well as early minion removal. And then next up, Seashill. This card I really like. So in rogue, this card is pretty decent just because it lets you cheat out a Burgle card for 2 less mana. That's never terrible. But in Paladin, this card is 3 mana 3/2. Your next Paladin card costs 2 less. In Paladin, oh boy, why don't I? Like, I'm just imagining you play Seashell on 3, you play Kangor dancing whatever on 4, and then you're ahead of the game if you're a dumbass big Paladin deck. But even if you're not big Paladin, this card is worth it. Also, very funny, you can shadow step this card in Rogue and then get multiple copies with Sonya to cheat out one thing absolutely ludicrously. Oh, Manager! This card, 2 mana deal 2, combo get a coin. I don't think this card is super good in Rogue. I do think this card is interesting in Paladin, but overall I'm not convinced it's like super good. So yeah, I'm not gonna glaze this card too much. Next up, Petty Theft. So this card looks boring on the onset. 2 mana, get 2 random 1-cost spells from other classes. But this card is actually super interesting for both classes. So in Rogue, if you're playing Cutlass Rogue, this just replaces Thistle Tea Set. This is Thistle Tea Set but better, because not only are you getting cheap spells that you can instantly play, but these cheap spells that you can instantly play are also generally going to generate more cards from other classes. So when I first saw this card, I was not convinced it was good, but now that I see it more, I'm actually really liking it. And then in Paladin, this card is super interesting for a Burgle package, because the Paladin use for this card is fascinating, because not only are you generating a bunch of random Burgle spells, you can also hit Rogue spells, which also count towards Burgle. But on top of that, its own activation reduces this. So in Paladin, or if you play 1 Petty Theft, you are getting at least a 3 mana discount on Snatch and Grab. But there's a non-zero chance you're getting like a 5 to 6 mana discount on Snatch and Grab. So by playing 1 2 mana card, your 8 mana deal or pop 2 cards is now 4 mana. This card, I think this card is good just because of Petty Theft in Paladin. So yeah, this is a sick Burgle enabler for certain strategies. Anyway, I think the Rogue set is interesting, but it's interesting, and I'm excited to see what people do with the Warlock cards in Rogue. But I think the Rogue cards in Paladin are really fascinating, like above average in terms of interesting synergies. I actually want to play like a big Rogue ramp Paladin. Next up, Shaman. We looked at the Demon Hunter cards already, and the Pirates work really good with Cookie, and Cookie works really good with them. This is just a really good aggressive card. Also worth being aware of, this thing. Oh my god, Barano! Thank you so much for the raid. Another thing worth considering with Carefree Cookie is this card has 6 synergy with Trusty Companion and any other future Murloc's Shaman synergies. So right now, I wouldn't say it's incredible, but I would say keep an eye on this guy. He could surprise you. Next up, Caress Cabaret Star. I love the design of this card. If you don't know, it basically transforms into a whole bunch of different versions because you need to play 2 different spell schools and you get all these effects that stack properly, so you don't have to worry about them not working well. I love this card for both classes. I think if you're playing Shaman with Demon Hunter cards in it, this is sick. I think if you're playing this in Death Knight, this is also sick. I think even if you're playing like just a regular, I think if you're just playing like a regular Shaman, you might even consider this. Depends what the like Fire and Frost ones are. So Fire is deal 6 to the enemy hero, sick. Frost is freeze 3 enemies. And Nature is gain +2/+2 and taunt. That's kind of weak. But Arcane is draw 2 spells. So it's like, of the standard Shaman spells, you get some decent stuff. Trash and DK. I'm not convinced this is Trash and DK. I'm convinced other stuff is Trash and DK. But Shelter Effects, token aggressive Shaman with Wave of Nostalgia with the cookie stuff could be very good. The Razzle Dazzler. I love the flavor of this card. But the Razzle Dazzler. I love the name of this card. I just love the name. The name is fun to use. This card seems very interesting. Battle Cry, summon a random 5-class minion, repeat for each spell school you've cast this game. So on a base level, this card is worth about like 6.5 mana. If you get 1 spell school this game, this is technically worth it. The problem is, can you get, or is this going to be a meta where you can consistently get to 7 mana? I'm just not convinced it is. But if this is a slow meta, this is actually just good enough to play. If you get 1 spell school. And in either class, getting 1 spell school is very easy. And getting 2 is not impossible. Next up, Natural Talent. So I was hoping we'd see strong spell school types. This is, I think, better than it looks, but it is not extremely good by itself. The reason why this is good is how it synergizes with other cards. So on a base level, this is 3 mana, get a random Naga and a random spell. They cost 1 less. That's not amazing. But I will say the Naga pool is actually pretty good in Standard right now. The problem is can you afford to basically float 3 mana to generate 2 random cards? And the answer is, you generally won't have to. Cabaret Headliner makes that card very solid. So, in order for Headliner to be good, you just have to hit 2 different spell schools. And I think in Death Knight and in Shaman, that's very easy to do. Now, if you have Demon Hunter visiting Shaman, you have Fel and Shadow spells being granted access to. And then on top of that, you have Nature, Fire, Frost. So that's like 5 or so different types. It's pretty reasonable to see that you'd have 2 to 3 by turn 4. So I actually think this card is very solid. And it's going to be why this Spell School's Shaman Death Knight stuff works. Especially because buttons can tutor this can tutor the targets for this directly to hand. So it makes it like more consistent in Death Knight, weirdly enough. But both classes get access to a new Frost spell. Now in Shaman, I think Frosty Decor is kind of nuts. Like, this card is a lot of healing and defense. In Death Knight, I'm not convinced you play it, but it is like not terrible. Now with the Natural Talent, the Cabaret Headliner looks a lot more interesting because you're able to almost loop it. And then because you can consistently have, if you play a deck where you consistently have Headliner live, it is worth considering to have Razzle Dazzler in your top end. Because again, Razzle Dazzler is like a way better version of that 7 mana spell from Mage. So this card is like a lot of health. If you're able to get it What are the current spell schools we have now? The current spell schools in Shaman are Fel, Shadow, Arcane, technically because of Wish Upon, Nature, Frost, and Fire. So if you have Cookie in your deck, you have access to 6 different spell schools, and a few of those are pretty consistently easy to see. So that's why I think Razzle Dazzler is good. The problem is the meta going to be too fast for it? And that's where I'm not sure. But I think on a base level, this card is actually very strong. For Shaman specifically, Frosty Decor has 6 synergy because it's also probably the single best Hagatha spell. Siren Song, I'm kind of pissed at this card, honestly. This card should have had a spell school. If this card had a spell school, I'd be way more confident in saying this package is good. But because this doesn't have a spell school, this is pretty mid in my mind. Matching outfits. This card is intriguing for both classes, but I don't think it's super good. If it's a very buff-based meta, this is a really sick card because you nerf whatever they were buffing, and then you generate whatever they got nerfed. Yeah, intriguing card. Not super convinced it's very good, but it is intriguing. Meltelemental. This card is pretty strong, actually. So this card is like a super taunt wall. In both classes, you can leverage this in interesting ways. Like I was talking about, this weird 2 Frost deck that you could play. This 2 Frost, 1 Unholy deck. This is really nice in that because it gives you a permanently frozen defensive wall. But even in Elemental Shaman, this is like a big fuck you freeze that keeps your chain going. So this, I think, will see play in both classes. And then Malted Magma. This is a fire spell that buttons can use. It's also pretty decent. Combos very well with any spell damage. So this could see play in a lot of different Shaman decks. And it might see play in Death Knight just so that you can have a guaranteed fire spell for buttons. So it's like you have that for buttons, you have this for nature, and then you have you have Shadow and Frost pretty consistently in in Death Knight. So you have 4 types consistently if you're playing buttons. And I think that's might be good enough. Next up, Warlock. Warlock got a super interesting set, and first up is Summoner Dark Marrow. This card is insane. 4 mana, 4/4, Death Knight Tourist. That's very good. As we talked about before, the Death Knight stuff works really good with self-popping and aggression. Your Death Rattle's triggered twice. That's very good. After you play a Death Rattle minion, destroy it. That's pretty good too. So this is basically Bran Bronzebeard for Death Rattles. Yeah. That also gives you access to Death Knight stuff, which, yeah, this just seems nuts. I think there will be a new aggressive Death Knight Warlock Zoo deck that will be very solid. It will use freeze synergies and Death Rattle synergies to push on board very hard, and this thing will be like the straw that breaks the camel's back. Next up, Party Planner Vona. This is probably one of my most anticipated cards. 6 mana, 4/4. Battlecry, if you've taken 8 damage on your turns, summon the Ouroboros. If you don't know what the Ouroboros is, it's an 8 mana, 8/8. Taunt, Death Rattle, give a minion in your hand, summon Ouroboros. So, why would you do this? So, dealing self-damage to yourself and Rogue is pretty easy. It's just surviving it. And this is a very sick payoff for that sort of Ouroboros. Oh, you're right. It is spelled different. Damn. I assumed it was Ouroboros, but Ouroboros. But anyway, Ouroboros is a very funny payoff in a rogue deck. So the first thing my brain jumped to with my dumb amalgam brain is, oh my god, the new amalgam card, giving it this effect in your hand means that you have infinite Ouroboros and will shuffle in a card that will give you infinite Ouroboros that will buff other stuff Orobos, sorry, that will buff other Orobos stuff. And yeah, you basically never run out of Orobos on your field if you get it on the Amalgam, which is very funny. But I didn't think of it at the time. There are other cards that have really gross synergy with this in Rogue specifically. And one of them is a card I've been playing a lot of. The Bargain Bin Buccaneer. That's right. If you play the Orobos and it buffs your Bargain Bin Buccaneer, you now get 2 Orobos attached to 3/2 bodies with Rush that will then buff something in your head twice. The problem is can you afford to take this much self-damage? And there is an argument that you can't. However, I like to play with fire. And I think that you will play a very small Warlock package to try to just abuse this card. Because most of the other Warlock cards do not work well in Rogue. But some of them are very funny. And let's keep going. Cursed Souvenir. 2 mana, give a minion +3/+3, and at the start of your turn, deal 3 damage to your hero. This card is a lot better than I thought. I'm still not convinced that Rogue will play it. But this is really nice in an aggressive Warlock. Like, oh my god, is this sick in an aggressive Warlock. So I didn't notice this when I first read it, but because it's at the start of your turn, you actually won't get the damage until it comes back to your turn. So this is just give a minion +3/+3. They have to clear it. And if they don't clear it, they're dying. So yeah. Also, this card can give very funny lethals. You can buff an enemy minion. And if you buff an enemy minion, they will deal 3 damage to their face at the start of their turn. So if you're in Wild and you're playing against Ice Block as an aggro Warlock deck, congrats, you can kill Ice Block now. Fun fact. But besides that, this is just an aggro card, and it's not terrible. There might be an aggressive Rogue deck that uses this, but I don't see it. I could see an aggressive Warlock deck definitely use this. Next up, Announce Darkness. 2 mana. Replace your hero power and non-Warlock cards with Warlock ones. They cost 1 less. This is bad. Funny, but very bad in both classes. Probably the single... Like, this is the second worst card of the expansion. The worst one's in neutral, and we'll get there. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say. I don't think there's anything, like, wacky you can do with this. This is just, you're playing this, it's a meme card, or you generate it, or you keep it in ETC to, like, transform against stupid stuff like plagues. Yeah, it just, you're doing this for the meme. Next up, the Fellfire Bonfire. This card is interesting for both classes. So, 4 mana, deal 4 damage to a minion. If it dies, your next death rattle costs 3 less. So, in Warlock, this is interesting because it also works with the Death Knight cards that they get. There's that 3 mana 2/2 that freezes 3 things or deals 5. That's really good with this card. There's also 1 death rattle coming up here. And then in Rogue, the only 2 things you have to use with this are Dust Bunny, which nobody uses, and Drilly, which is good, but I'm not convinced that you'd actually want to run it. You might want room for it, but it's kind of hard. Again, if you have more targets than just Drilly, this is worth it. And that is where the Orobos comes in. Because, fun fact, since your minion in hand gets a death rattle, it actually will get cost reduced with Fellfire Bonfire, which is very funny. So, yeah, this card will see play in both classes, I think. If there's going to be a Warlock package in Rogue, this is one of the cards that makes the cut. Next up, Health Drink. 3 mana, lifesteal, deal 3 damage to a minion, 3 drinks left. Listen, in Warlock, you might consider this in a slow control deck. In Rogue, you might consider this because it works like this is a god tier Cutlass enabler, and it keeps you alive. I think both decks can consider this pretty reasonably. The problem is that 3 mana is a little chunky. But you can also synergize this with the 3-mana pirate for Rogue. That'll make this 1 mana, and that's very funny. You can also use this with Prep and Sonya, which also is very funny. And again, this works very well with Cutlass because, yeah, this does everything you want in Cutlass. It's a Cutlass card that heals you, that also generates 3 charges by itself. So yeah, this card is pretty good. Next up, the Sacrificial Imp. 3 mana, 1/6. Death Rattle. If it's your turn, summon a 6/6 Imp with Taunt. This is a hard card to justify in Rogue, but in an aggressive Death Rattle, Death Knight Warlock deck, I think this card is very solid. Especially because you can give this idiot Reborn, and you can just absolutely shred your opponent's deck. So yeah, I think this card is very good in both classes, or specifically in Warlock, and does have 1 or 2 decent synergies in Rogue, but I'm not super convinced. Like, the main thing I like about this in Rogue is the 4-mana Conman Pirate, because you go this on turn 3, you go Conman on turn 4, you get another one, and then you're able to trade these off, and maybe that's good enough. But yeah, this is kind of awkward otherwise. However, if you are playing this in Rogue, you're definitely playing it with Eat the Imp. I like this card a lot in both classes. So, destroying a friendly minion to draw 3 cards is good in an aggressive Warlock deck. It's also not terrible in... Or, actually, I forgot about 1/6 synergy in Warlock with this card. There's the Corruption Tentacle. The 1-mana spell that pops a minion you control to pop a minion the enemy controls. That's very good with this card, too. But Eat the Imp is another interesting card. I think that this might make it into... This card is interesting because on a base level, I think that Warlock will play this in any form of aggressive deck. Even non-aggressive decks, you might consider this. Rogue, I think, actually does consider this because of one card that's coming up. Also, if you're playing this dumb Amalgam Vona idea, I like this as a way to instantly pop your Amalgam, so you guarantee get out a Vona or an Ouroboros to defend your face, and you draw 3 cards, which helps you, again, getting through your deck so you see your Amalgams quicker. So, I like this card in both classes, actually. Next up, Fearless Flame Juggler, 2 mana, 1/1. Battlecry, gain stats equal to the damage your hero has taken this turn. I'm not convinced this card is very good, but this card does have some funny synergies in Rogue with your weapon, obviously. In Warlock, this just feels like a shittier version of the Fatigue Imp. Yeah. The problem is you have to take the damage, unlike the Fatigue Imp, where it's like, it will trigger your things that won't let you take damage. Maybe there's like a Zoo deck where you play both, but yeah, this card I think is a miss. However, what I don't think is a miss is the Party Fiend. 1 mana, 1/1. Summon 2 1/1 Fell Beasts. Deal 3 damage to your hero. So why is this card good? I think this card is actually pretty solid because obviously in Warlock this card's insane. Like, we don't even have to like sugarcoat it or anything. This card is nuts in Warlock. It's better Flame Imp, and Flame Imp has been good forever. Like, technically this is worse than Flame Imp in the late game, but Flame Imp sucks ass in the late game anyway. But in the early game, this is better because it gives you more presence on board. You can get that 2 mana buff on one of these guys, and then your opponent's going to cry. Also, the reason why I think Rogue will consider this, on top of just being good, and on top of just enabling Vona, is it works really well with the Eat the Imp. Rogue rarely gets tools that let you go wide on board. And I like this card for the fact that it lets you play a premium draw card, which is never a bad thing, but also enables your Vona if you want to do the Vona thing, which I think people will. And it's just good early game, which Rogue can always use. So yeah, I would not sleep on this guy. I think he's good in both classes. Next up, Ham the Hungry. We already looked at the Druid cards. 6 mana, 3/3. Druid Taurus, taunt at the end of your turn. Eat a minion in the enemy deck to gain +2/+2. This card will be tilting, but I don't think it's very good per se. Like, unless you scam this out with like the Rye Cleaver or other stuff like that, I'm not convinced this card is actually that good. This is like a worse version of Mutinous, like a much worse version of Mutinous, but you get the Druid ramp stuff, so you are going to be playing this. So again, yeah, I don't think this card is super good, but I do think this card is necessary just because of that first line of text. The second line of text is just going to make combo players rage. Next up, the Rye Cleaver. I love the design of this card. I think it's one of the coolest designed cards in Hearthstone history. And because because Warrior got ramp, I think it might actually be really good. Maybe not incredible, but I think it's better than people were giving it credit for at first. Now that Druid has ramp. So yeah, I'm excited to goof around with this card. And it also helps that Warrior got some really good big stuff in enablers. Oh yeah, the 1 mana pack is very funny with this. But there is a card later that I think like could solidify in my deck that this is good. Next up, Draconic Delicacy. I like this card a lot. 8 mana, 6/6, rush elusive, can only take 1 damage at a time. Now it's hard to put this card in a warrior or in a hunter deck, but oh my god, is this good in a warrior deck. Draconic Delicacy, I think this is a sick minion to get in your sandwich. But even outside of your sandwich, this card is very scary. Like, Moonfang was a little annoying back in the day. But if you gave Moonfang elusive, holy shit. And then it also gets rushed, so you instantly can clear something. God damn. It also works with hand buffs if you play them, but you don't even need them. Like, this card just seems really good in a big deck. And again, because Warrior has ramp, the big stuff is actually viable. Like, you can't forget that Moonfang was pretty bad back in the day, but this is very strong for what it is. And the fact that you're able to generate so many threats in Warrior with the Druid stuff, and yeah, I just think this is one of the key cards that's going to make this big Warrior deck potentially work. Food Fight, 3 mana, summon a 0/6 entree for your opponent. When it dies, summon a minion from your deck. So, interesting card. What works about this card is that because if you go for like super... Oh yeah, Dahim actually brings up a good point with the other card. This is sick with Chemical Spell. Holy shit. Chemical Spell might just be good now. 5 mana, 6/5, rush, elusive, can only take 1 damage. Seems good. But yeah, Food Fight is interesting. I think that if you're playing a big spell or a big minion deck, what you want to do is normally you just want to fill your deck with like early game removal. So Food Fight basically says, okay, you can get a minion out of your deck, but at the cost of some of your early game removal. And I think that's a very interesting design space. I like this. It's also going to be like one of the most important cards in the big deck too. Char, 4 mana, deal 7 damage to a minion. Give a minion in your hand stats equal to the excess damage. I'm going to be real. This I think is kind of ass. It's not like terrible, but it's not very good either. I just don't know, like, I don't know what you're playing with this. Like, this is a really good arena card, but in like a regular constructed deck, I don't know what you're doing with this. Undercooked Calamari, that's a funny name. 4 mana, 3/4, battle cry, destroy an enemy minion with attack less than or equal to this minion's. So this is a good hand buff card. This works great with the Char. Again, I don't know what like deck you're built. Like, will we see the return of Amalgam Warrior? Probably not, but it'd be cool. Probably not though. This isn't going in the big deck. Yeah, this is like for Amalgam or like Also, in like Control Warrior, you could theoretically run this if like there's stuff like Amanthul or Amethyst that you have to kill. That's kind of interesting. At least in ETC. I don't know. All you can eat. Okay, 3 mana, draw 3 minions of different minion types. Also included in Hunter. I don't know how well Hunter can use this, but I will tell you that this is a very cool card in Warrior. I think this is what makes the Rycleaver deck work. Because before with the Rycleaver, it was like, well, you could do the taunt scam with the pack, and that's cute, but I don't know what else you're doing with it. And I guess, like, you can do other stuff, but this card, I think, is what makes... this card is what makes the Rycleaver deck work. You go turn 7 Rye, turn 8 you play this, you do the sandwich. Oh, you can do Voon. I didn't even think of that. That's funny. Yeah, Voon is actually great with this too. But I'm not assuming that you're playing Voon in the big deck. Maybe you will. Either way, there is like some really sick things you can do with this. And I think that just in general, this is a solid draw card that tutors specific things. And because it tutors 3 different types, this is one of those cards I love that it like influences how you build your deck. And maybe we could see this in like Highlander Hunter even. Like, I'm imagining like you get like, there's the Naga, there's the Mantle Shaper, the 5 mana, 5/5 Naga Elemental that reduces by 1 for every spell you cast. This can tutor 2 of these. Or this can tutor 2 of those. And then you're able to play out a bunch of spells, get them for 0, and you feel like a fucking king. So yeah, I think that this card is actually pretty sick. And next up, the Monstrosity, 9 mana, 6/9, taunt. At the end of your turn, summon an elemental with stats equal to this minion's. It's a big dumb taunt elemental. It does what you want it to do. Seems good. For the big decks, yeah. You can either hand buff it, but I don't even think you need to hand buff it. If you're able to cheat this out, it is worth it. I guess actually Chemical Spill does kind of suck with this because you get what? 5 mana for 2 6/5s, and one of them is taunt. I mean, that's still good. Actually, if you have the Druid spell, that's actually really sick because then you can have the Druid spell to revive the Monstrosity right away. Now we're cooking. So yeah, I could see like a Chemical Spill, Taunt Warrior, Scam deck be pretty decent. Next up, Line Cook. 3 mana, 2/4. Tradable Taunt. When you draw this, get a copy of this. There's probably some dumb hand buff thing you can do with this card, but I'm not convinced it's good. It is interesting for like a control deck though, because it's technically like infinite value. Again, if you're going for like the infinite game, this is not a bad card to have in your pocket. And this does have interesting interactions with hand buff stuff, but I'm not convinced it's that good. I will say, like, I could see Control Warriors putting this in ETC for mirror matches. That could be pretty funny. Next up, Cup of Muscle. This is actually a pretty strong hand buff card, but it is a weird hand buff card. So I don't know if you're actually, like, want to run this, but it is interesting. Probably, I will put this in the pack filler pile. But it is intriguing. Next up, Marin the Manager. You know him, you love him. He's very good. Nothing else to say. I love this guy. Absurdly strong. Borderline broke Druid. Next up, Incendious. 6 mana, 2/10. At the end of your turn, upgrade your eruptions. Battlecry, shuffle 5 eruptions into your deck. There are 2 OTK decks with this card. Yes, 2. One that people generally know about is Shaman. You can play Shutter Block into Incendious, get 15 eruptions that all deal 2, and then next turn you do some like Gaslight Gatekeeper stuff, shuffle your whole hand, deal a gajillion damage, and kill him. The other one is one I came up with that's available to Mage, which is arguably not as good. But it's the same idea. So the Mage one is you play Messadune, the 5-mana Elemental Tutor, on turn 5. You draw Incendius as your only Elemental. You have 2 1/5s. And then on turn 6, you play 2 1/5s. You shuffle 10 Eruptions in your deck. But at the end of your turn, you upgrade them twice so that you have 10 that deal 3 damage each. And then turn 7, you do Gaslight Gatekeep Girl Boss to win the game. So this card is pretty interesting for both of those strategies in unexpected ways. Besides that, I don't know what you play this in, but I think this card will see some play. Ooh, Rogue plays Incendius, Shadow Step Incendius, then you go Sonya with the Pirate in order to make it 1, and then you play double Incendius to get 15 that, yeah, deal 3. Yeah, so that works too. There's some cool things you can do with this card in a bunch of different classes. But I will say, I think the Mage and the Shaman one are the most interesting just because they kind of like let you play the game naturally, but have this sick payoff. The problem with the Rogue one, as cool as it is that on turn 6, you have to play Incendius and Shadow Step Incendius. So you are sacrificing the board. Whereas what I like about the Mage one specifically is like you're never actually sacrificing the board. You're just playing the game. And then anyway, next up, this is the true pack filleriest legendary of the set, AFK. I think this card is ass, but I don't think I'm unique in that regard. I think everybody thinks this card is ass. Now, what's interesting is that this card we might be wrong about this card, but I don't see it yet, because this card originally in playtesting was +3/+3, and they nerfed it before release. And that's not often that they do that. They do that like once every 2 or 3 expansions. So it is possible that we are misevaluating this card somehow, but I don't see it. So yeah. Next up, Grifta, Trusted Vendor. This card is very good for a bunch of different decks. If you're playing any form of control deck or any form of like just decent deck, you want to consider this card. Ladies and gentlemen, Grifta being actually playable is surreal to me. OG Grifta is one of the worst cards ever made. I don't know what else to say. Like, these are all good cards. And then the negative versions, some of them are kind of mid, but you can afford, like, in Rogue, you can use Grifta and Sonya, and if you discover that deal 6 damage, you can just kill people pretty easily. Some of them aren't, like, amazing. Again, like, this feels like a good 30th card. Like, if you need a 30th card in your deck, Grifta is not a bad option. Next up, Gorgon Zormu. This card is very strong, but I'm having difficulty deciding what decks specifically play it. It kind of reminds me of Photographer Fizzle, but this is arguably a lot better than Fizzle, but it'd be in the same kind of deck as Fizzle. So it's like, if you're playing an aggro deck, you don't really want to play 3 mana do nothing and get 2 mana kind of refill the board later. But if you're playing a control deck, 3 mana 3/3 that gives you a 2 mana cheese that you can actually afford to wait and then fill the board with like insane stuff, or even fill the board with not insane stuff, but just be able to fill the board as a control deck, seems very solid to me. So I think this will see play in many Highlander and control decks. Quoting this on 2 and then making 3 2 costs on turn 3 is pretty good. Yeah, but I don't like to evaluate cards in like that kind of a narrow vacuum. I like this card a lot. I do think that an interesting application of this card is because it's a dragon, this can allow classes that didn't really have dragon packages before to have interesting little dragon packages. Like, you can play the Gift Wrapped Whelp, and then in a bunch of different decks now with like Gorgon Zormu now, and like 1 or 2 other dragons, and now you're like, oh, this is a cute little package that actually works pretty well for me. But like, I'm thinking in Rogue, I know, shocker, but in Rogue, like, you can use this, Gift Wrapped Whelp, the new Amalgam, and Valorok as your dragons. And that might actually be a good enough package to just play in Burgle Rogue. Or in an Amalgam meme deck, which I'm definitely going to be doing. So yeah, I like this card a good amount. It's just... It reminds me of Fizzle the most, where it's like, this is just a good card, but it needs the right conditions for it to be really good. Next up, Seaside Giant. When this card was first revealed, this was bad. This was real bad. But now that we've seen all the locations, this actually has a few homes it could be good in. Rogue Death Knight actually has a very interesting package they can do where they can play the Horizon's Edge and like the 2-mana Reborn location, and then you can have Seaside Giant plus the Flesh Eating Giant in an Unholy deck, and that could be kind of interesting as like this Unholy Turbo Tempo. Yeah, so this card is actually a lot better than it looks, and we'll see if it's any good. Dread Deserter, 6 mana, 6/6, has charge if this didn't start in your deck. So unfortunately, this is the worst card to pull in the set. Doesn't have a choice really, but I like the flavor of this card, and I also like how this works with ETC. Now, can you do anything with it? No, I don't think so. Not yet, at least. I don't see like any grand combo with this card. Everything's a little too awkward for this guy. But maybe we can keep an eye on him and he might do something interesting. Like, there are little synergies that can work. Like, you can run this in your deck and then generate a copy with Creation Protocol. And yeah, if you clone it on your field, it'll have charge, I think. At least that's what would make sense to me. So there is like stuff you can do. But, oh, you can get it off the Ride Cleaver. I didn't even think of that. Oh shit, that actually might be good. Oh my god. You use the 3-mana spell to tutor this as your pirate. But yeah, so this is a very weird card, but it's gonna be interesting to see what people come up with this. Carry On Grub. 4 mana, 5/4. Battlecry, get a 1-cost suitcase. Pack the top 2 cards of your deck into the suitcase. And then Carry On Suitcase. Get another card and another card. It'll tell you what the cards are. This card is super interesting. It's just basically a draw card. It's just a solid draw card if you're willing to spend 1 mana. But yeah, this thing has to cost 4 mana because if it was any cheaper, oh god, this thing would be used in everything. As it stands though, there are some decks that can use this. Even Rogue can abuse this pretty well because I'm just thinking Sonya memes, like you do this, you Carry On Grub, you get a second Carry On Grub with the Sonya mini combo. Then you get 2 suitcases, you get 2 copies of what was in those suitcases. So you can basically generate a whole bunch of copies of cards from the top of your deck. But as cool as that is, like the fact that you can't control what you get makes it a little less appealing. Like I would say Grifta's a little better because Grifta gives you a specific card that you know what you can get. Maybe you can do like a really meme deck with like preps or something, like preps and 0-cost cards, so you can just go boom, 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 get a million 0-cost cards, boom, boom, boom. If old Edwin was still in standard, you could do really funny things with this card. But as it stands, this card is probably just good enough in like Highlander decks, because it lets you cycle through your Highlander stuff a little quicker. Mixologist. This card is also good in Highlander decks. So if you don't know these Kazakhstan potions, the 1-mana ones were always traditionally the ones you'd pick if you were smart. Obviously, sometimes you'd go 10 mana if you had the time, where you rarely did. 5 mana if you really needed a good board clear. But the 1-mana ones were very strong back in the day. Now, nowadays, they're not quite as good, but they are still good enough. So I think this card will see play in a bunch of different control decks and Highlander decks to leverage some Very fun old school combos. So yeah, you pick one, or you discover one twice. And traditionally, if you want to know some classic good ones, summon a friendly minion was always nuts. Give your minion +2 was underrated as hell, but gain 4 was always solid. Freeze was always solid. Deal 3 was always nuts. Deal 2 was always nuts. And draw card was always never terrible. So Mixologist, like, you're combining 2 of those effects, and yeah, you can get some really solid potions. So I like that they made them. But next up is my favorite card of the set, without a doubt, Adaptive Amalgam. Holy shit, I love this card. I shouldn't have to say why I love this card, but oh my god, it's basically everything I wanted. Because I wanted a card that could enable Amalgam Rogue to be playable again. And oh boy, does this card do it. This card is so cool. So, for synergies that you might not be aware of, because this is a pirate, if you draw it with Dig for Treasure, you will get a coin. You can tutor this with Pit Stop. That's pretty cool. You can buff this with Gift Wrapped Well. That's pretty nice. What else can you do? Oh, right. You can give this the Vona Death Rattle. So if you give this the Vona Death Rattle, then you can pop it and summon Orobos, shuffle in the Amalgam that just popped, and then get infinite Oroboses for the rest of the game. What else? Oh, you can magnetize onto this, which is amazing. You can use 3 mana. You can use Crystal Cove and Magnetize to give this a permanent +5/+5 buff. Oh, we were just talking about the Warlock Death Rattle. But yeah, there are so many cool synergies with this card. It is actually insane. And I'm so excited. You can also theoretically give this Rush before it dies, and then tutor it with the friggin' paint, guy. There's like so many dumb, weird things you can do. Old Forks Home is not wrong, but it's not Death Rattle DK. It's Hand Buff DK that can use this absurdly well. You can give it a ton of sunscreen. You can give it hand buffs. You can leverage it in weird ways. I even like that you can like if you have Vone already on it, or if you have what's it called? Oh, you can give it Wind Fury too with one of the cards we'll be looking at in neutral. But obviously the Spark Bots can give it all the abilities. Yeah, I love this card. I'm so excited to goof around with this card. It does so much. It's basically the kind of card I love playing. Also, just forgot to mention, another sick part. Yeah, Mazek, you can't give this thing Reborn. That's the one problem. You're absolutely correct, though. You can't give this thing Reborn. You can give it the Saddle Up Death Rattle forever. That's a fun one I didn't think of. You can give it the Chameleon Death Rattle, too, and buff. No, they will carry on Monosandalos. That's the best part. You don't want to give this Reborn because when it reborns, it'll come back as a 1/1 with no bonuses. And then it'll keep shuffling in. So unless you have an absurd amount of draw, it's just not worth it. But Magnetizing carries over, so it's like you can give this thing permanent Lifesteal. You can give this thing permanent Poison, permanent Divine Shield. Another fun thing you can... It's actually the most like old Kingsbane. But another fun thing you can do is... Oh, what's another fun thing you can do? I had like a whole deck where I theory craft dumb stuff with this card. Oh, I forgot to mention one of the coolest things about this card that nobody talks about because nobody cares except for me. However, if you play multiple copies of Adaptive Amalgam, they count as types for one Amalgam band! Yeah! Didn't Paladin have this on a card and it was terrible? You are technically correct, Undercast. However, that card had no typing and was 2 mana. How would it work with Bloodlust? It would not keep a buff with Bloodlust because Bloodlust is only until the end of turn. Yeah, if you wanted to do Undertake combos from Paladin now in wild decks. You can do it in every class now. So yeah, I love this card. It is very strong. I'm shocked at how good it is. This might actually get nerfed, but I hope it doesn't, at least for a while. Shadow Juanathan is correct. You can also spread its death rattle to other minions in DK, which is very funny. Yeah, this is just a very silly card. Yeah. But yeah, the real thing is like Crystal Cove. The real thing is like Crystal Cove with amalgams is just so damn cool with this card. Next up, Package Dealer, 6 mana, 6/7. After you draw a card, 50% chance to draw another. It's bad, but it's cute. This is pack filler. The Octo Masseuse, 4 mana, 1/8, deals octuple damage to minions. This is an interesting card. This has very sick magnetized synergies. But even without the magnetized synergies, this is intriguing. I'm not very, like, I think people will have fun with this card. I don't think it's very good, though. A card I think is actually pretty decent is the Bumbling Bellhop. 3 mana, 3/3. Taunt, if you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, summon a copy of this. There are some decks I think can use this very well. Mainly, like, Ramp Druid, Ramp Warrior, Big Spell Mage. Yeah, there are some decks that I think can use this pretty well, and it does have interesting implications in some of those decks. This also is a great card to hand buff. So if you want to hand buff anything, this thing's pretty solid. Yeah, I don't think this card's incredible, but I don't think this card is bad. 3 mana, 2/5 Customs Enforcer. Enemy cards that didn't start in their deck cost 2 more. This card is very annoying, but I don't think it's very good. There will be some matchups where this card will just win the game on the spot. But, I don't know if you, like, these kind of, like, hard counter cards are generally not that good. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people just generate enough so that this is always good. But yeah, you're right. It's a hate card, and it's good designed to include hate cards every set. At least to some degree, yeah. Travel Agent, 2 mana, 2/2. Battlecry, discover a location from any class. This card is intriguing because it's a good burgle card. But I think there's a better one that we'll talk about in a bit. As it stands, this thing is okay. Yeah, like, there's some locations that are bad. I think it's like 3 locations are like ass, but everything else is decent. Beached Whale. This card is really awesome. For all these new big decks that are popping up, this is a very sick enabler. Also, Thunderbringer, obviously, absolutely is insane with this card. Holy crap. Yeah, if you pull this out with Thunderbringer, your opponent is crying. This is basically like this. I think we might see the return of Hadronox style decks, which I know some people love. I did. Other people hate. Next up, the Snoozin' Zookeeper. 7 mana, 5/8. Battlecry, summon an 8/8 beast for your opponent. It attacks all their minions. This is interesting. I think this card might actually see play in Druid and in Warrior specifically, if the meta is very aggressive. Because if you're able to cheat this out by turn 5, this against an aggro deck is actually game breaking. But playing this on turn 7 is not really worth it. However, if you're consistently able to play this on turn 5 against aggro specifically, this is insane. Weapons Attendant, 6 mana, 6/4. Battlecry, if you control another pirate, equip a random weapon from your deck. So I thought this card was ass when it was first revealed, but as we've seen more of these little pirate spammer archetypes in Paladin, in Shaman and in Demon Hunter, this card is actually kind of interesting. is like I could see like an aggro deck that uses this as top end in order to just scam out a big fuck you weapon to just ruin your opponent's day. Like obviously you can't do the Ride Cleaver, but you can do the grappling hook, which will have which will be immune because you played it with the attendant, or you can do like the Horn of the Windlord, which is decent, which with the 3-mana Fel spell is really nuts, or Shadow spell is really nuts because then it becomes 14 damage. So there's a world where I can see this see play, but it's still probably not good enough to see play. But maybe some aggro decks will tech this in at the top end. The Bayfin Bodybuilder. 5-mana 4/7. After a minion is summoned for your opponent during your turn, silence and destroy it. This is a very weird card, but there is some gross synergies. Mainly, this is the ultimate anti-token card. If you hate token decks, oh man, does this guy shred them. Also, if you love Dirty Rat, oh man, this guy is Dirty Rat's best friend. You never get punished by Dirty Rat anymore. Now, do you actually play this in a deck? I don't think so yet. Oh, Frontlines is a very funny one in Wild. I don't think you play this in a deck in Standard yet, but maybe the right meta would let this be teched. Ooh, that's a funny interaction, Palpatine. You can use this with the Showdown to instantly get like Showdown on your side. Nice. So there is cute stuff you can do with this card, but I'm not convinced it's like super good. Maybe I'm wrong. Scrapbooking Student, 5-mana 5/5, Battlecry, summon a copy of a friendly location. There's only 2 locations I would consider copying with this. The problem is this is 5 mana. If this was cheaper, this would be nuts, but that's why it can't be cheaper. Yeah, there are a few ways to disrupt existing locations. What I like about this card in theory is that like there are a few locations that you want to duplicate or triplicate. Obviously, Yogg's Prison's nuts, but I think for ones that came out in this set that you want, like it's the Rogue one is really sick with this, but then this thing being 5 mana is kind of a pain in the ass. And the Horizon's Edge is nuts with this. That actually might be the top end for an aggressive Death Knight deck or aggressive Shaman deck. Is like Horizon's Edge, or sorry, not Shaman. Who's visiting Death Knight? Or an aggressive Warlock deck. It's like Horizon's Edge. You trade or you don't even trade yet. You go Scrapbooking Student to get a second one, and you summon a bunch of tokens, and you just ram, ping, 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 ram, ping, 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 ping. And that might be enough. But besides those 2, I think that this is more of a meme card. Next up, the Resort Valet. Speaking of a meme card, 4-mana 3/5, discover a card from the newest expansion. I like the flavor on this card. I don't know what you're playing it in, but it's funny. Next up, Sleepy Resident. Taunt, Death Rattle, all other minions fall asleep, so they don't become dormant like I thought. They just go to Summoning Sickness. This is interesting, but I don't think you play this in any constructed deck. This is worth being aware of being in the pool, and this is also worth playing in Arena. Wavepool Thrasher is intriguing only if tokens are popular. Otherwise, it's not good. But speaking of a card that is good, Concierge. 3-mana 3/4. Your cards from another class cost 1 less. So I shouldn't have to say this, but this applies to cards that are visiting from a different class. So if you're playing Druid and you hate your opponent and life itself, you can play a bunch of Mage 1-cost damage spells. You can use Concierge to make it 1 mana less. And then you can set up a very dumb spell damage borderline OTK. Even just aside from that, there's probably some decks that can just use this. It seems like a good card. Even like if you're playing a Paladin Mage hybrid, you can use like Concierge to make... it would make some of them cost 0, but yes. Yeah, there is a lot of good synergies with this card, and I won't be surprised to see this card seeing play. Next up, the Cryopractor. 3 mana, 3/3, battle cry, give a minion +3/+3, and freeze it. So there's only 2 decks I can think of that would use this, because originally I was looking at this and I was thinking, this is just the shittier version of the Outfit Tailor, because it just doesn't do anything. Or rather, Outfit Tailor is -1/-1/1 buff and health, but you can attack right away, and it works with hand buffs. This does not work with hand buffs, but freezes. However, there are freeze synergy archetypes in this set that can actually use this card pretty well. There's the Perma-Freeze Taunt from Shaman. I think there is a world where you can use some dumb stuff like... I think there's a world where you can use some dumb stuff like this whole Warlock Death Knight freeze deck I was talking about earlier. You can use this in there. I don't know if you would, but you theoretically could. So this card is a little better than I thought it was, but I'm still not convinced it's good. Hosen Roughhouser, 3 mana, 2/4. Whenever another friendly pirate attacks, give it +1/+1. I mean, this is okay, I guess. It's good with the 1/1s, but aside from that, it's not very good. This feels like a Battlegrounds card, not a real card.
Do it.
Old Forks Home, thank you for the follow. Yeah, I'm just not convinced this card is good aside from the 1/1 Fell Pirates. And even then, I'm not convinced that those are that good. Lamplighter, this card is good though. 3 mana, 3/2, deal 1 damage, improved by each turn in a row you've played an elemental. This card seems very abusable in elemental decks, as well as can make a new elemental deck in Elemental Rogue. That's right. Because Firefly is in Standard, you can now consistently maintain enough elementals so that this will be live for quite some time. And the longer it's live, the crazier it gets. And then you can turbo murder your opponent with like Shadow Steps and Breakdances over the course of a bunch of turns. Now, is this deck good? Maybe. Is this deck fun? It seems kind of boring, but even in the other decks, like this is kind of a win condition, like in Shaman and Mage. The biggest problem with those decks is that they lack lethality, and this is lethality. So I don't know if those decks are good, but this is at least worth considering. And it is like this thing that exists in the periphery is getting better cards. Overplanner. This card is what you use the top deck stuff for. 3 mana, 3/3, battle cry, discover 3 cards in your deck and put it in that order. I don't know what else you play this in, but this is kind of intriguing. Mainly for that priest deck. And I guess Demon Hunter playing that priest card. I'm not convinced it's super good, but maybe I'm wrong. Sailboat Captain. I think this card is only good with the Amalgam, but it is very good with the Amalgam. Aside from that interaction, this might as well be a fucking Battlegrounds card. There is like other stuff you can buff with this, but I'm just not convinced that those like hardcore aggro pirate decks are going to be that good. The only one that might be decent is like the Demon Hunter one. Next up, Terrible Chef, 3 mana, 2/1. Battlecry, summon a Nerubian Egg, Death Rattle, destroy it. This is an interesting card, mainly in Warlock actually, because Warlock is looking for 3 mana Death Rattles to leverage with the Fellfire Bonfire, and this is a pretty decent one. Also, you can give this thing Reborn, and then it's useless. But no, seriously, yeah, this is not bad. It is basically 2/1 summon a Nerubian Egg generally, or summon a Nerubian generally. But you can also like leverage both bodies sometimes. So yeah, I like it. It's good in any undead deck too. Recruiter, 2 mana 4/1, discover a pirate. I love the Uncle Sam meme in the background. Overall, I don't think this is very good, but this will be a good card to generate. If you trigger this Death Rattle twice, you will only summon 1/4/4. Coconut Cannoneer, 2 mana 1/4. After an adjacent minion attacks, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. This is literally a Battlegrounds card. No, it's not literally a Battlegrounds card, but it might as well be. This is not good, I don't think. This is like a shittier version. This is a really shitty version of the ship's cannon, because it only triggers on attack, and it only deals 1. Granted, the stats are okay, but yeah, not good. And yeah, you are right, Mono Sentinels. Pirate Rogue and Wild will be nuts, but I'm a standard Andy, so yeah. Next up, the Drink Server. This card is the card that has grown the most on me. So, Immick, you got to get on updating all the drinks, because there's a lot more than just one. There's 6. What I like about this card is a couple of different things. First of all, it is a Murloc Pirate. That means it is 2 card types in 1, which is useful for weird amalgam shit, and I'm a weird amalgam man. Second of all, get a random drink spell is always going to be a Burgle in Rogue. That is pretty interesting. And most of them are pretty good cards. The only bad one is like the Cup of Muscle. Every other one is decent for different reasons in Rogue. Even the Priest one, which normally wouldn't be that good in Priest, is actually decent in Rogue, because if you're playing, if you're playing Vona, it's your best Vona enabler. You get 6 damage to yourself over the course of some turns. This also enables Eudora in 1 card. This also enables Valorok in 1 card. This also works towards Cutlass in 1 card. This is better in every way than Thistleteeth set, because Thistleteeth set is 2 mana, get 2 spells, which is not terrible, but this is 2 mana, get a 2/2 that gives you 3 spells. And that is good for tempo. Also, it works for any pirate synergies you might have. Also, it works for any Murloc synergies you might have. I think this card is the sleeper of the set, if anything. In my opinion, this card is basically the Watcher of the Sun of this set. There's like 3 1-cost drinks for Sonya Mezek. There's the Divine Shield one. There's the Mini Arcane Missiles one. And there's the Hand Buff one. So I love this card. And I think people are sleeping on it like crazy. Next up, XB931 Housekeeper. After you use a location, gain 3 armor. This one's intriguing. It's really good with the Druid location, but aside from that, I don't think it has a home anywhere. Like, the problem is like, what deck do you play for this? The issue is that this is like, at worst it's a 2/3 for 2. No, at worst it's a shittier version of the Plated Beetle, and that's already in standard. So you have to get 2 procs of a location with the Housekeeper for it to be better than Plated Beetle. Which is possible because all these locations can reactivate themselves, but this is not an easy to use card right now. Nissa, even Jayhawk's rated the Drink Server high. Based, we both recognize its greatness. But yeah, I love this card. Yeah, you could do something with the giant card in a couple of different classes in this. But again, this is just a weird card to use. It's not bad, but if you're able to get 2 procs on it, it's great. If you only get 1 proc on it, it's Plated Beetle. And Plated Beetle hasn't been good in 5 years. And last, but certainly not least, the Tidepool Pupil. 1 mana 2/1, Naga, Battlecry. If you cast 3 spells while holding this, discover 1 of them. I shouldn't have to say it. This card is very, very strong. Being a 1 mana Naga already makes it good. Being just the fact that it's a 1 mana Naga makes it good. But there is a lot of decks that can use and abuse this. I don't even know how to start summarizing it. I like how this actually incorporates the old, if you've cast 3 spells while holding this keyword. Super good, super interesting design. But this is like a really scary card, because there's a lot of decks that can use and abuse this. There is one thing I forgot about with the Amalgam that I'll talk about in a sec. But, like, let's say you're playing Naga DH. This card just seems absurd. Like, worst case scenario, oh no, I play it as a 2-1, and it enables my sharpshooter. But best case scenario, this gives me additional value in a deck that normally doesn't have it. If you cast a discounted spell, does the Discover keep the discount? No, it will not. There is one thing I forgot about with the Amalgam that I think is very scary, and I don't know if people have talked about. Let me go back. Oops. This card is incredible in Naga DH. Not only is it a mech you can discount with Frequency Oscillator, but it gives you infinite Nagas in your Naga DH deck. So as long as you're able to play this for cheap, you can keep cycling it and keep burning your opponent. And on top of that, for a very dumb random synergy, you can give this thing Rush with Through the Felon Flames, which means that the copy you get later will also have Rush and will also be buffed by +1/+1. And then on top of that, if you play like a Rush Tutor, which I know Demon Hunter has like 1 or 2, you would get the discounts from the Rush the Stage by tutoring this card, which means that this card can be like your 0-mana starter Naga for the Sharpshooter combo. Anyway, that's the whole set. I like this set a lot. I really like how everything kind of inter-synergizes with itself. The only things that have me really worried are like the aggro priest package. I hope it's not as good as it might be. Also, I think Death Rattle, Freeze, Death Knight, Warlock will be nuts. Big Ramp Warrior and Big Ramp Druid seem like they'll be crazy too. Yeah. I don't know what else to say. This is a good set. There's very few like ass cards. But my God, when the ass cards are ass, they are very ass. Either way, unfortunately, I have to call it there for today's stream. Thank you all for joining. I will catch you guys all next time. I'm going to chuck this on YouTube, and I'm going to have a very special announcement very soon that I'm hoping to show you guys soon.